Hey guys, welcome back. So for this one, we're getting into our full coverage of Venom War. So we'll be talking about the main 5 issues as well as a bunch of the tie-ins, in addition to a number of references from Venom Volume 4 and 5, as well as Carnage Volume 4, in order to bring this all together, or at least try to, because there was a lot of things that came crashing into this event. But nonetheless, this will set you up to hop right into all new Venom, as well as the new Carnage series that both take place after Venom War. And I have a link in the description to the all new Venom playlist, and I'll update it later once we get started on the next Carnage run. So with that said, if you're enjoying these videos, do be sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications. Alright, so heading into Venom War, this starts out in a really crazy way, but it comes together rather quickly to make it simple as far as who's on what side and what all of this is about. But starting out, we find ourselves at Grand Garden Arena for an open challenge that's being held by the Unlimited Class Wrestling Federation, so that whoever it may be, man or alien, if they have what it takes, then they've got a chance at walking away with the unlimited golden belt. But rather quickly we find out that this whole thing is about as real as wrestling can be, because as these two guys get ready to fight, they're literally talking to each other about the fight choreography. So that right there just lets us know that this is all a show. But just before all this gets started, time displaced Eddie Brock alongside of Tiro, Wild, and Bedlam drop out of the time stream, making their way to this garden not long after the destruction of Meridius's garden. And as soon as they get here, they just wreck these guys and take over the whole arena. So now, because actual bones are crunching, the evacuation siren goes off, and that's the cue for the live audience to leave. But Eddie ends up picking up the microphone and telling them to keep the drone cameras rolling, because he has a message he wants to deliver and he wants it to be televised. So he looks in the camera and he tells New York that this ring is theirs now. It belongs to the Kings in Black. They're not giving it up until they get what they want, which are 2 things: his son, Dylan Brock, and the Venom symbiote. As he goes on to say, welcome to the Venom War. And I gotta say, for anyone who hasn't read Venom in a while, or you just don't know what's going on here, for now, just know that there are 2 sides, with it being Eddie Brock versus Dylan Brock. And each of them have symbiotes and or other people on either side, but the bottom line is Eddie doesn't want Dylan to bond with the Venom symbiote again, and Dylan doesn't want Eddie to bond with the Venom symbiote either. And we'll talk about the reasons why in a little bit, because for a moment we visit each side, as well as the symbiote who's in the middle, and Peter Parker, who just got dragged into all of this. But first, starting out with the Venom symbiote, who for a moment here is going through its oldest memory, all the way up till now, starting from back when it was first discovered and bonded to the Kree soldier Tel-Kar, which is something we covered a while back in Venom First Host. And I got that link in the description in case anyone needs to go back and check it out. But for the symbiote, with its first host being a Kree soldier, this leans into the idea of the Venom symbiote only knowing war its entire life, because after Tel-Kar, the symbiote met Peter in another war, where at the time during Secret Wars, the symbiote was in a very dark place, because its previous host Tel-Kar forced it to do bad things. He controlled the symbiote, damaged it, but when it met Peter, who at first just thought it was a high-tech alien suit, Peter was like, oh, this is not bad. So the symbiote interpreted that as if it were Peter saying that it wasn't malicious or evil. So going forward, the symbiote took on Peter's war. And because he was a much better host than the previous one, the symbiote would have done anything for him. Which is why at times when Peter was asleep, the symbiote would pilot his body and go out to protect his kind. And it would have stayed with Peter forever. But as history went, Peter didn't feel the same. And the symbiote remembers Peter saying that he'd rather die than to be bonded to it. But even still, it saved his life, and after that it wore his symbol and continued to fight his war, the war against death itself, which is what then led it to saving Eddie. Because when it found Eddie in Our Lady of Saints Church, the symbiote felt like it had a responsibility to save his life. And part of its way of doing this was by going to war with Eddie against Peter, since that's what Eddie needed at the time. And the symbiote admits that this portion of its past is a bit complicated, because even though Venom has told Spider-Man that he wants to eat his brains, the symbiote says here that it never actually wanted to kill Peter, though at times it might have seemed that way. But following this, the Venom symbiote does more of a speed run when it comes to the other hosts that it's had after Eddie, but looking back, the Venom symbiote just believes that it's destroyed all of them, and only with the exception of Dylan, because as it stands, the symbiote's not sure if Dylan's still alive or not, because during Blood Hunt, Meridius told the Venom symbiote that Dylan's still alive, and Eddie's coming back, though at the same time it's not sure if it can trust Meridius or believe any of that. And because the symbiote wasn't able to save Eddie or Anne or any of the other hosts, it decided not to go back to Dylan in its injured state after going toe-to-toe with the captive. So instead it made its way to the home of Peter Parker so it could hide in his closet and just die there. But the truth of the matter is, the Venom symbiote is just afraid of trying to protect Dylan and failing. But as the hand of fate would see it, Peter reaches into his closet for his regular costume after seeing Eddie on TV, only to grab the Venom symbiote and put it on, which was not the symbiote's intention. So right away he's like, "Oh, Peter, don't freak out," though at the same time it's like, how can he not? But following this, for a moment we head over to Dylan, who's currently living on the streets since Eddie's been gone for so long. And like we saw in Venom issue 35, it's here where he's met by the future version of himself, who's come back to kill the future that he's from. So from here, grown-up Dylan just explains off the bat that this doesn't play out well. So for that reason, he's used Doom Tech to travel to the past. So if he changes it here, it stays changed. But in order to make this work, he's gonna need present-day Dylan's help. But all he really says here as far as any plan is concerned is that there's 3 points in the past that he needs to push on. And if he does that right and Dylan does his part, then later they'll get one golden opportunity. Because as far as this whole Dylan versus Eddie thing goes, like I said before, neither one of them want the other one to have the Venom symbiote, because Eddie believes if Dylan bonds with it again, the future he saw of the whole world covered in the Venom symbiote, it's gonna become a reality. While on the other hand with Dylan, when he died and met the eventuality, at the time he was allowed to ask 5 questions. So for Dylan, after finding out the horrible past of the Venom symbiote, he asked the eventuality what would happen if the symbiote got back with Eddie. And that answer was the two of them becoming the anti-all, with Eddie swearing that the 9th cosmos would be the last cosmos, and the last light standing in the void. So on both ends, with both Eddie or Dylan, they see one another as either the end of the world or the end of the universe, which at its core is what this whole war is about. But among the questions that Dylan asked, he only asked the eventuality, what his dad will become, how to stop him and where he was, but he never asked how to get him back. And really that's the part he doesn't have to worry about now, since Eddie's returned. And Dylan's getting ready to get that news from Bren now. But as Bren comes to tell him, future Dylan's like, "Oh, I gotta go." But it's done in the way where Bren, or Toxin at the moment, he doesn't see or hear future Dylan. So it looks like present day Dylan is just over here talking to himself. But going forward, it's here where Dylan finds out that Eddie's back. And it's funny because Eddie and Bedlam, Tiro, they're just wrecking everybody who's made their way to the garden to try to shut them down. And it's a bit ridiculous, though at the same time this is Eddie trying to get the message out. And as we're told, the Avengers are busy at the moment, so they haven't made their way there yet. So in the meantime, it's just been mercenaries and heroes for hire, and really just whoever can get there to try to shut it down. So Bran ends up telling the others if this psycho wants Dylan, then they've got to make sure that Dylan stays here. Because without the Venom symbiote, Dylan, he's just another kid. So there's not really much he could do if things went left. And from the looks of things, it may come to the point where they might need to do more than just fight Eddie to avoid the future that Dylan saw. So before they do anything, Bren wants to know that Dylan's ready to do what needs to be done. And following this, for a moment here we go over to Alchemax, where we find Liz Allen having an emergency meeting about this Eddie Brock situation. And as it turns out, the mercs who were sent in, they were not only sent by Alchemax without Liz knowing, but they were also pretty much the only thing they had to send out. And I mean, aside from Jack Carson, who was working for Carlton Drake, but Jack Carson is no longer with us, so he's not really an option at the moment. And with things seeming to be out of control here, Carlton Drake brings in one of the Life Foundation's top consultants, who goes by the name of Mr. Meridius. And really, there's no short way to explain him showing up here. But if you've been checking out our coverage on Venom, as well as the recent Carnage series, you may remember when we talked about Alchemax having a secret K program, which included a number of projects like synthetic hives, mind control, and possible human inoculation, to potentially create things like a symbiote vaccine, or even weapons designed to kill symbiotes. Which again, all of this was going on behind Liz's back. She just happened to stumble across the K program recently. But prior to this, one of their most dangerous developments was chemical K-43, which at one point leaked into the water system, killed a bunch of people, and made others sick, which you would think would stop a project like this, but not for Meridius because he's taking it to the next level with chemical K-44. which improves on the original chemical and includes a secret ingredient that he says will guarantee them the win in this Venom war. And just after this, we go back to Peter and the Venom symbiote, where now after the symbiotes told Peter his side of what's going on, Peter lets him know that Dylan would be a lot safer if he was wearing the Venom symbiote. Though keep in mind, Peter doesn't really know about the whole Venom world threat, and the Venom symbiote, he don't know what to believe right now. But this ends up going into Peter giving the Venom symbiote this speech on responsibility. And it's really touching because he tells the symbiote he's got a choice. You can choose to do good things, you can choose to do bad things, or you can choose to do nothing. But regardless of whatever you choose to do or not to do, you're still making a choice. And choosing how to live is the only power any of us have. And that power comes with responsibility. And it's really touching how Peter just convinces the symbiote, like, hey, you gotta choose to do something, because there's nothing we can do about the past. And the look on the symbiote's face is just like, man, he felt that message. So next, when we go back to Grand Garden Arena, we see that Eddie notices a particular symbiote creeping around in camouflage, who of course, as it turns out, is Sleeper, who's now made his way here with Dylan and the others. So at first, Eddie's like, I'm back, I'm happy to see you, son, but now I'm gonna need my symbiote. I need Venom. So of course, Dylan tells him that he can't give him that. So right away, Eddie starts thinking about what'll happen if Dylan doesn't give him the symbiote. And when Dylan tells him that Venom's gone, Eddie snaps. But Dylan shuts this down really quick, because for one, he's left Dylan on his own for months, and the last time Dylan saw his dad, it was as Bedlam, when Bedlam was trying to kill Dylan. And to take it a step further, Dylan lets Eddie know that he knows all about Venom's past. And as soon as Dylan drops that bomb, Eddie asks, where is he? To where next the voice comes from up above saying, here, don't worry guys, Venom's in good hands now. As Peter swings through, back in black, bonded to the Venom symbiote. Alright, so for Venom War Spider-Man issue 1, this initially picks up from what we saw in Venom issues 34 and 35. During Blood Hunt, when the captive nearly killed the Venom symbiote, who was already weak at this time since it had been separated from Dylan for so long, which like we saw, this left it no choice but to bond with the deceased Lee Price, just long enough for them to defeat the captive, and soon after be met by Meridius, who made his return, only for him to take the zombie Lee Price and leave the Venom symbiote behind with no host. And with the Venom symbiote being in a very dark place at this point, it decided to find a place where it could just curl up and die. And what better place would there be to do that than Peter's closet? But fast forward to Venom War issue 1, when Peter realized he was putting back on the Venom symbiote, this surprisingly turned into a heartfelt conversation between the two of them, which allowed Peter to get caught up with a lot of the things we've seen take place in the Venom series, most notably the reason why the symbiote's trying to stay away from Dylan, where in that case a lot of it's guilt, since Dylan now knows Venom's dark past. And it turned into this cool thing where Peter gave his speech about responsibility, as he told the symbiote we can't turn away from the choices we made, as Peter agreed to help the symbiote along the way. So now, in Venom War Spider-Man issue 1, we see the symbiote ever so cautiously placing itself back on Peter. And it's kind of funny how the symbiote's like asking for consent every step of the way, and saying things like, are you sure? We can stop at any time. It's kind of like, let's go man, don't make it weird. And Peter's totally cool with it, but the one thing he does say, or the one request that he makes, is that they don't actually bond and keep separate minds. And the symbiote's cool with it, so they head out to make their way to Grand Garden Arena to meet up with Eddie Brock and his symbiote version of NWO, with Eddie Brock recently making his war declaration, which Peter also saw on television earlier, which is why he was heading out to begin with. But as you might imagine, Peter's still trying to wrap his head around some of the weird elements to this whole thing. And I mean, as far as the headlining plot to Venom War, we covered this back when we talked about Venom War issue 1, as far as what Eddie wants and what Dylan wants and why they're trying to stop each other. But in the here and now, the Venom symbiote's just like, the symbiotes have gone to war. Eddie and Dylan and other Eddies controlling other symbiotes, here to kill us. Cause that's all the Venom symbiote's really focused on right now. And aside from that, there's other subplots that the Venom symbiote's not aware of that we'll talk more about in upcoming issues. But as they're on their way, Peter's spider sense goes off out of nowhere. And it's not so much because they're in any immediate danger, but instead it's like an echo of memories, or a nostalgic overdrive if you will. And even though at this time it's not really explained why Peter's seeing these memories, or what each of them actually mean, but at this point I'm thinking it's one of three things. because it could be 1, previous time travelers causing Peter's memories in the present day to catch up, which would be more Terminator-like stuff. 2, this could be Meridius, who was kicked back to the beginning of time by Eddie Brock, who's recently returned as Mr. Meridius. Or 3, this could have something to do with what the eventuality mentioned about how it was supposed to be Peter and not Eddie Brock. Because all we really know at this point is that Peter's mind is not bonded with the symbiote, so it's not like these memories are coming from the symbiote. But we'll just have to wait and see what it means over time. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. But right after this, Peter's spider sense goes off again, but this time there actually is danger, with him getting attacked by what would seem to be the Hobgoblin. And it's funny because for a moment Peter's like, which Hobgoblin is it? Are you Roderick or Ned? But it isn't long before the symbiote unmasks this person, and Peter finds out that it's neither. And unfortunately, Peter's not able to do much for this lady when the glider goes into a building, but fortunately the symbiote's able to save Peter at the last minute. And just when they're able to gather themselves, it's here where they find out there are dozens of Hobgoblins out here in these streets. But when one of them tells Peter, you took everything from me, again and again and again. Now all that hate has come to collect. Peter immediately recognizes that voice and he's like, oh yeah, that's Roderick Kingsley. And the Venom symbiote's able to tell that the rest of these Hobgoblins, much like the woman from earlier, they're all brainwashed. And the Venom symbiote knows this because it can taste the brainwashing like it's a particular flavor that's floating in the air from these people. But there's a moment here where Peter asks the real Hobgoblin, how did he know to find him here? So he tells Peter, you have enemy Spider-Man, and you have one in high places, who can see through eyes in the sky. Told me right where you'd be, which right there is just another hint of someone else targeting Peter. And with Peter now knowing which one's the real Hobgoblin, as well as the fact that the rest of these people are just brainwashed, Peter mainly focuses on him. And as far as the Venom symbiote telling him that he can tell these people are brainwashed because he can taste it, Peter makes sure to tell the Venom symbiote that eating brains are off limit, buddy. So the symbiote agrees, but only because he called him buddy. And things get turned up here when the Hobgoblin catches them with a pumpkin bomb, which they're able to deflect this time, allowing Peter to jump through the fire of this explosion and catch the Hobgoblin off guard with a direct hit. But when they do, Peter starts to go off on the aggressive end, and mainly out of frustration, because he's more concerned about the innocent people who are being harmed throughout all this, who are also trying to kill him in the process. So Venom lets him know that's exactly what the Hobgoblin wants. He's using Peter's obsessive need to save everyone against him. So for a moment, Venom's like, let me help you out here, because the symbiote's got a number of upgrades since the last time him and Peter bonded. And one of those upgrades is being able to produce steel, as the symbiote breaks out with the Venom chains, and he switches up their whole look. And these web chains that we initially saw at the end of King in Black, when Dylan put on the symbiote. When this rolled into Venom Volume 5, we learned it was a sign of the symbiote's evolution. So after the symbiote survives a series of difficult events or is placed through a sequence of hardships, it becomes more powerful. So now this is like Peter getting a taste of the great power that the symbiote has attained since the last time they bonded. But just after this, both the Hobgoblin and all the other brainwashed cosplay goblins, they all come after Peter together. And at first he's able to evade a number of the attacks, but not all of them. And again, the thing that's making this extremely difficult is the fact that Peter's trying to save these civilians at the same time. And it makes for a very Spider-Manly moment with Peter and the Venom symbiote working together, where he's like, we are Spider-Man, as opposed to the classic saying of we are Venom. But while they're here stretched out, Hobgoblin's more or less like, nah, I'm gonna tell you what we are. An easy target, because after that he just gets it to rain pumpkin bombs right on top of Spider-Man. And it's a big enough of an explosion to light up multiple blocks. But when the dust settles, we see that Peter and the Venom symbiote were shielded and protected by Jackpot, aka Mary Jane, which has been a thing for a while now. She has this bracelet that'll give her random powers like a slot machine. So yeah, that technology is pretty much the exact opposite of Felicia Hardy's bad luck. And you know, to be honest with you, this feels a lot like when Iris West was like, we are the Flash. It's giving that same type of vibe for me, and I'm just not crazy about it. But either way, when Jackpot shows up, she definitely makes a comment about seeing Peter back in black, and it's really just like, oh man, you're back in that parasite? And I mean, I'm surprised Peter didn't roast her, because I mean, we're not gonna start with this outfit. And I mean, no disrespect to Paul or Felicia for hooking her up with the threads, but this Booster Gold Harley Quinn mashup, it just ain't doing it for me. But nonetheless, they don't spend too much time talking about the symbiote, but MJ's reaction is just enough to let the symbiote know that she hates the symbiote just as much as Peter loves her. But this conversation is cut short, because from here they cut the small talk and focus on saving people who are in danger. And following this, next we head over to Alchemax, where we find Mr. Meridius enjoying the view, as he says, back with Peter, so predictable. Always thought I was the dumb one, didn't you? But here I am, outthinking you, outplaying you, even outmaneuvering Spider-Man, waiting patiently through the entire history of this planet to bring the chaos I'll unleash tonight. Somewhere in your mind, I hope you can hear this. The only thing I'm gonna enjoy more than watching this wreck your world is killing your little friend, and at the end of all things, you will be mine. To where next we see Meridius push a button on a remote, which then causes the black substance to cover the Hobgoblin and all the other goblins. And as they're all being pulled together, a voice emerges saying, I am free. Free is us. And we are the Arachniote. Not to be mistaken with Tarantuthulu. But as soon as this thing shows up, the Venom symbiote recognizes it, and he tells Peter this thing's a legend of Clintar, the mind who consumes all it encounters. Nothing has ever survived its touch. It was feared even by Knull. And the symbiote goes on to say, if we're gonna have a chance, I cannot just be your costume. You must be my host. The bond remade. Our minds as one. We must be together. We must be Venom. Which is some really heavy words right there. Because apparently whoever bonds with the Venom symbiote, they could potentially bring on the end of the world. Alright, so for this one, we start out in old man Dylan Brock's future, in New York, with him making his way to the center of the city. And all we really know about this future at this point is that mankind is doomed, which is why this older version of Dylan Brock needs to go back in time and correct that. And when we find him here, he's being chased down by these things that look like a mixture between the machines from War of the Worlds and the Matrix Sentinels. Like, we're not really told exactly what they are, though I'm sure we'll learn more about them and the rest of this future down the line. But with future Dylan making his way to the center of the city, he gets a bit nostalgic here, and he thinks about how he used to love this place, cause even with things in ruin, the place still feels familiar. And even though his mission is to prevent this future from happening, there's still things in this version of the world that he's gonna miss. But the fact of the matter is, if he's successful in this mission, then he'll never see this world again, because it'll cease to exist. But to take it a step further, if he's successful in his mission, he won't be seeing anything ever again, because he'll fade away along with it. And it's because of that, future Dylan has accepted the fact that it's his mission to die. But if he dies now, then everything he's done to this point will have been for nothing. And for a moment here, he's nearly taken out by one of these things, until it's shot and he's suddenly saved by the future version of Normie, alongside of his mother, future Liz Allen. And in addition to them, we also see the Bailey Briggs of this time, who in the present day is Spider-Boy, who swings in to let them know more trouble's on the way. But this leads into what Dylan knows is going to be his last moment with them, and it causes him to even second guess if he's doing the right thing, because they mean the world to him, and he's about to erase this future from existence. And just before Dylan's able to jump back to the present day, Normie and the others have danger close, so Liz opens fire first, because she's not about to watch her son die, and Dylan's just forced to watch them be overwhelmed as he makes his jump back to the present day. And as soon as old man Dylan arrives in the present day, he knows exactly where to go to find his younger self, which from here takes us back into the conversation between old man Dylan and present day Dylan that we got back in Venom issue 35 as well as Venom War issue 1. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this part here, but I do want to put a bit of an emphasis on some of the things that future Dylan said to his younger self. Like for starters, he mentions the machine on his back is Doom Tech, so it'll allow him to change the past so that way it stays changed. Because if you guys remember, back in Venom issue 25, Doom mentioned how he invented the true method of time travel that wouldn't bind him within the cages of time, because so many others that time travel to the past either do what they were destined to do, which would later make no difference in the future, or in addition, they would make an alternate past instead of actually altering the past. So for Doom, instead of being locked within the cage of the laws of time, he rose above it by implementing magic where the science had limitations. So unlike those who find themselves locked within the rules of time, Doom considers them to be doom-locked since his understanding is superior and the others failed to adopt a greater degree of magical thinking. And I say that just to point out the fact that if anyone could create a device that would allow future Dylan to go back and change his past and create an alternate past without it branching off into a new timeline, Doom tech is undoubtedly the way to go. But going forward, future Dylan goes on to talk about how time is a juggernaut, it goes where it wants to go. So for that reason, the further you go back, the harder it is to change where you came from. Which once again goes back to Doom's explanation when he mentioned the butterfly effect. Because even though individual events have weight that'll change the future, if you go back too far, you either have to change something insanely substantial, or you have to kill an insane number of butterflies to produce the change that you want to see in your future. And that's why with Old Man Dylan, as he's also called here, he tells his younger self there are 3 points in the past that he needs to push on in order to kill his future. So he goes on to say, if I do it right and you do your part, at the end of this, we'll get one golden opportunity. And just before he leaves, he tells present day Dylan, I'm going to make you a weapon, but if I fail, then you know what's coming. So following this, Old Man Dylan goes further back in time. And when he does, his symbiote says, I hate doing that. I'm sure Doom made it uncomfortable on purpose, but we're not really told much about the symbiote that's with him, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just assuming it's Venom, since Old Man Dylan Brock is also referred to as Old Man Venom, though that hasn't happened yet in the actual story. So for that reason, I'm still kind of on the fence as far as what I want to call him. But nonetheless, we find out he's gone a little bit further into the past to find Molten Man, who at this point is not too hard to find, since future records state that in this moment Molten Man will bring a lot of attention to himself. But Dylan doesn't engage right away, he waits, because he knows Spider-Man's gonna show up and he needs to let Spider-Man do his thing first. But the crazy thing is, the news article that Dylan's using to even know when and where to go to find Molten Man, the photo in that article was taken by Eddie Brock. So when Dylan shows up here, waiting for his moment to go after Molten Man, not only does he see his father, Eddie Brock, taking the picture, which Dylan might have photobombed in this moment, we'll have to wait and see, but also Eddie has Anne Wang with her right now. So for Dylan, this is the first time he's ever seen his mother. And I think that in itself kind of catches him off guard here, because when Eddie takes the picture, it looks like Dylan may have stepped into it. So we'll have to wait and see if that gives us the whole Back to the Future changing picture thing at some point later on. But following this, Molten Man breaks out of his webbing, and he tosses the police car at the officers who were arresting him, just before sticking Dylan with the left and taking off into the alley, which is just messed up on so many levels. So Dylan rushes to help the officers first, before going after Molten Man. And when he does, it's here where we get a glimpse at what's the next step of his plan. Because the first thing he does when he gets close enough is heat Molten Man up, so he can soften his skin for the next phase of the plan. But it doesn't make the process easier for the two of them, with Molten Man still trying to fight back, which I mean makes sense because I'm sure he's experiencing some level of discomfort, but it also hurts Dylan to fight Molten Man with every point of contact, since the metallic alloy is now burning through his symbiote skin. But following this, Dylan's gun then turns into a syringe, which he just jams into Molten Man so he can take a sample. And of course, with seeing this, it makes me wonder if everything on Dylan, including the Doom tech, is all made from the symbiote. Because earlier in the Venom series, we learned this is what Carlton Drake was aiming for, which at the time is what he would call the long game of providing harsh stimulations for the Venom symbiote so he could watch it evolve over time, which is why he created Spearhead to give Venom that first push, though later we would find out that this was all really the plan of Meridius. But even before this kicked off, the latest evolution, if you will, for the Venom symbiote came at the conclusion of King in Black. When Dylan first bonded to the Venom symbiote and started using chains, it was upgrades like this that Carlton Drake and Meridius wanted to build upon, to find the upper limits of what the symbiote could do. So eventually, with all this symbiote chaos made its way to Doom's doorstep, he traveled to the future, he saw the Venom War, and he knew scientifically this fight could end a number of ways, but magically it would come down to two. So we've known for some time that Doom had decided to take it upon himself to determine how the Venom War would play out, and what better way to do that than to incorporate Doom tech with symbiotes, because the magic testing we've already seen with Bedlam during Dark Web. But that's just me speculating at this point. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. But as soon as Dylan drives this huge needle into Molten Man, he hears a voice from behind him saying, "Hey Gramps, I don't know what you're doing with that needle hand there, but let's keep it family friendly, okay?" As he turns around and sees young Spider-Man right behind him, which now makes it the second time young Peter Parker's gotten caught up in all this since back in Venom issue 25, when he also crossed paths with a time-traveling Eddie Brock. And I mean, it's the second time as far as what we've seen in just the Venom series, because on top of that, you also have the symbiote Spider-Man King in Black tie-in, which also had a bit of time travel as well. But following this, as we go further along and deeper into Venom War, I am curious to see what effects all of this time travel and these new encounters and this alternate past, as Doom would call it, have on Peter in the modern day. And I'll talk more about that when we cover Venom War Spider-Man, because present day Peter is definitely seeing some ripple effects. Alright, so going into Venom War Carnage, issue 1. This picks up from Carnage Volume 4, issue 8, back when Flash nearly killed Carnage after using this mysterious gun from Alchemax's secret K program, which at the time nearly killed Carnage. But with it disintegrating a portion of Carnage and just leaving a puddle to drip down in the sewer, this sent his scrambled consciousness back into his hive, where he then had to literally pull himself back together just so he can return to what was left of his symbiote matter in the real world. And there's a couple things I want to point out before we go forward, because at this time, as a result of Carnage Volume 3 and Death of the Venomverse, Carnage accumulated a ton of new powers, and he nearly eliminated all weaknesses. So fast forward to the beginning of Carnage Volume 4. At this point, the only weakness he had left was Anti-Venom. So to solve that problem, Carnage hunted down Flash Thompson so he could build up his resistance to Anti-Venom, which is why Carnage would fight Flash and then be like, okay, that's enough. Then he'd come back and fight him again and rinse and repeat until Anti-Venom just tickled. But Carnage was certain this was the last weakness he had to worry about, up until he was hit with that K chemical. And when this nearly killed Carnage, it put a new fear into him. So when he returned from his hive and got back into his symbiote matter, he just consumed who he needed to restore both himself and Cletus Cassidy. But going forward, this set Carnage's sights on this mysterious chemical. He needed to know everything about it, what it was, who made it, what's in it, everything. So to find out, he stirred up some trouble in a very public setting to lure out more people who would bring this weapon. And as soon as they came, Carnage snatched one up, pulled them into an isolated area, and he did his symbiote interrogation thing, where he forced this guy to give him the answers. But the only thing Carnage was able to get from him was the answer to who made the weapon, which was Alchemax in the K program. And mainly because when Carnage forces information out of people, it tends to break them, especially if it's just a normal person who he's doing this to. But after getting this information and the weapon that's just loaded with the K chemical, it's here going into Venom War where we find him using it to experiment on random people. And it's a slow death for each of these guys because he has it just dripping on their foreheads. And I imagine in some of these experiments he's tested it in different ways. But from what we're told at this moment, he's on subject number 32 and he's about to completely run out of his supply of the K chemical. But also there's a couple of things that we get here that show us where Carnage fits within the whole scheme of this Venom War. Because for a moment he goes back and forth with Cletus Cassidy, with Carnage believing that Eddie has something to do with the K chemical, but Cletus doesn't believe that Eddie has the imagination for something like this. But on top of that, Cletus is just bored with the idea of killing all these people so slowly. So between the two of them, Carnage wants to take his time and figure out what this chemical is. Because last time he was caught off guard, they were nearly killed because of it. So Carnage wants to be thorough and learn as much as he can about this K chemical. But on top of this, as Carnage and Cletus move on to their next subject, we also see the additional monologue that we saw in Carnage Volume 4 coming from someone who's watching Carnage, who I still believe to be Meridius, or Mr. Meridius at this point, because that guy still wants his lick back after getting his garden nuked. But this person who's observing, they start to say, since Carnage has started his experiments, he's had two leading theories. One, death is but a side effect of this substance. Its true purpose lies somewhere else. Two, it was made by someone far more dangerous than Alchemax, but Carnage does not know how close he's come to the truth, or how far someone is willing to go to keep him from learning more. And when they say this, we see a drone creeping up on Carnage while he's working and arguing with Cletus, telling him that he's not scared, he's just being cautious. But suddenly he realizes that someone is listening, and as soon as he turns around, he sees the drone and it detonates. And I mean, it disrupts Carnage for a moment here, but it doesn't do much of any harm to him, since he's already immune to fire. But when this happens, he pops up from out of the sewer, and Carnage is like, where are they? Who did this? They are watching, I can feel it. Cause now Carnage knows for certain that he's being observed by someone. So now with him looking for who this someone is, on top of investigating the K chemical, these are the main two things that have the attention of Carnage at the moment. Because after destroying the Garden of Meridius and building up his immunity to anti-venom, Carnage has just placed Eddie and Flash on the back burner for the time being. So they're not the priority. At this moment he needs some answers. So going forward, Cletus tells Carnage that he'll take it from here. He'll find this new threat and he'll kill them, as Flash watches them walk away into the crowd. Which right there just lets us know that Carnage is so caught up with this that he doesn't notice Flash is one of the people who's been watching him. So yeah, Carnage is quite busy in Venom War. He's got enemies on every side. So he's got to prioritize them by who he believes to be the most dangerous and place his focus there first. So for the time being, this still has Carnage and Cletus going after more information concerning the K chemical. So from here, we go forward 2 days later, where we see a woman at a bar by the name of Sally Christensen. And she's having this conversation with a guy that seems harmless at first, with him approaching her and getting to know her. But this whole time, we're told that the Carnage symbiote knows that she's lying, because the symbiote can smell that she's not telling the truth. It can smell that she's interested in this guy. So later on, they take this conversation over to a booth off to the side, and she asks this guy about his parents. And right there, this dude turns into Cletus Cassidy. And overtaken with fear, she doesn't have time to react before Cletus and Carnage go into her brain to get the information they need about the K project. And it's here where we're told 3 years ago she was stuck. She was scared she would lose her job. Months of research had led nowhere. The symbiote strains remained cannibalistic, violent. However she combined them, they still tore each other to pieces. Then he showed up, Finn Taylor, from some Alchemax subsidiary. He brought a substance. She didn't know what it was, but she took it, used it. It was the breakthrough she needed. It made the strains pliable, workable, destructible. In return, she gave him access to everything. But that's all the information they're able to get out of her. Because just like what we saw with the soldier who had the K chemical gun, this interrogation ends up breaking her mind too. But going forward, Cletus and Carnage have a name, Finn Taylor, which means they now have a next target. They even checked out his dating profile. And you can tell from that flashback up until now, Finn, he's come up in the world. He dresses better, and he even pays extra for the clear ice cubes in his old bourbon. And it almost makes you wonder how this guy got so lucky as to find some mysterious ingredient that catapulted his career. But it's here where we find Finn conversating with a couple of beautiful young ladies, where we're told that he has a particular interest in blondes. Lying blondes, as it would seem. So after telling this woman his job title as a pickup line, he ends up taking her home. And it's a nice place. He built it to impress. But Cletus describes it as having this generic American modern look to it. And I mean, it does, but it's still a sick crib. But nonetheless, with Finn recently building this new home, from a design point, it's showing off that new money. But underneath the surface, it has an anti-symbiote security system, which Cletus and Carnage can sense as they approach. So for a moment here, they come to the door as a disguise, as a guy from Kilowatt Electric. And it's funny because this dude Finn, he goes off. Because he's just like, does this ever work? You're a grown man walking door to door on a Friday night begging. Aren't you embarrassed? Don't you have a shred of dignity? So Carnage, in disguise, he's like, come on, sir. No reason to offend my manhood. And Finn's just like, oh, I beg to differ. I mean, look at you. But right here, this guy from Kilowatt Electric, he transforms back into Cletus Cassidy. And he's like, yes, Finn, look at me. Which I imagine sounded a lot more like Heath Ledger's Joker. But as soon as Finn realizes that he's talking to Cletus Cassidy, he takes off to get the strap. And I'm talking about the kind loaded with K chemicals, while his guest is over to the side watching. Like, what is going on? And you can tell that Carnage is just letting this guy make his way to the weapon and whatnot. Because when Finn gets to his gun and he lets off these shots loaded with K chemicals, Carnage could sense this weapon before he even saw it. So Finn lets off multiple shots while saying, do you think I'm afraid of you, symbiote scum? But this time around, when Carnage gets hit with it, it gives him a familiar pain since it's the same thing that nearly killed him. But this time around, instead of disintegrating and melting away, Carnage has built up a level of immunity to it. So next, Finn, he circles back around. He tells his date, get up, as he goes to get a larger K-chemical gun and give the girl instructions on where to find the safe room. And I gotta point out, during this whole fiasco, he's telling her things like, don't worry, I do this every day. Almost as if, in his mind, he's hoping that this goes well enough so he'll still have some points and get some later. Because after all, there's a safe room in the bedroom as well. But as he's giving these instructions and telling the girl the code to get in the safe room, he turns around just to find out that he's been talking to himself. And from there, he goes down the hall only to find out that Carnage has already bodied the poor girl. And Finn can't even remember what her first name was. But at this point, that doesn't even matter. Because while Finn's distracted, Carnage catches him slipping from behind. But Carnage doesn't kill Finn right away. Instead, he does this gruesome combination of consuming Finn's insides, crushing his lungs and stopping his heart while keeping him alive, as Carnage uses Finn's body and his voice to pick up the phone and tell Natalie it was just a false alarm. Everything's fine, as Finn is just helpless in his own mind, hearing his own voice speak from his mouth, which he has no control over, while the voice of Carnage is now in his head, saying, "What about now? Are you afraid of me now?" Alright, so in our recent coverage of Venom Volume 5, we saw Natasha Romanoff following a lead on a covert syndicate that went by the title of No Name, who were kidnapping and murdering Alchemax employees. And like we saw, this investigation eventually led to her arriving at a site where Venom and Toxin barely made it out, and it was here where she initially found a curious newborn symbiote, to which she bonded to, and shortly after, they took on the identity of Widow. They teamed up with Dylan, helped him to save Toxin and go after No Name. But it was at this time where we found out that Dylan did not believe Widow was a good host for a newborn symbiote. And it's not even like Dylan knew about Natasha's sketchy interrogation methods, where she would use the symbiote to extract information from people while also allowing it to feed on their brains. And it wasn't even so much the case of Dylan thinking Natasha wasn't a good person, but it was more so the case of him believing that a spy was a bad choice for the first host for this newborn symbiote. But it wasn't something that was lingered on for too long, with Venom telling Dylan that they need Widow, regardless of Natasha being the best fit for this symbiote or not. So at the time, they just went with it because Bren and Toxin's lives were on the line. But one of the substantial things about No Name was that they were trying to get revenge, because years ago, Alchemax leaked a mysterious substance called K-43 into the water supply that killed a number of people, only for Alchemax to cover it up. And we'll get into more about Natasha looking into this K-chemical in a little bit. But if you want to check out more about this story, I got a link in the description that'll get you all caught up. But after her team up with Dylan, the Sleeper, Symbiote, and Toxin, Natasha and her symbiote went their own way, whilst Dylan's story went into Symbiosis Necrosis, as well as Carnage Volume 4, which were both leading us into the start of Venom War. And following this, in the Black Widow Hawkeye series, in a sequence of events where at first Widow thought Clint was dead, she used her symbiote to get the information to find him. And she eventually did find him in Madripoor, where he was definitely alive, and wanted for the murder of the Russian minister. And so I don't want to spend too much time on this particular story, but there are a couple of things from it that I feel like I need to bring up because of the way they come back in both Black Widow Venomous and Venom War Venomous. So bear with me for a moment here. But not long after Clint confessed to killing the Russian minister, Natasha and her symbiote knew Clint was lying. So her symbiote took it upon itself to try and go into Clint's mind and get the answers, which, as we've seen prior to this point, it's not a pretty process, because the symbiote practically tends to lobotomize whoever it does this to. So Natasha stopped it from pulling the truth out of Clint, but only seconds later, when Clint was hit with a lethal poison dart coming from an assassin sent by Natasha's old enemy Damon Dran, this then led to Natasha using her symbiote to extract the deadly poison from Clint to save his life. And there was more elements that were at play in this series, with Clint not being too crazy about the symbiote, as well as the symbiote being a bit jealous about how close Natasha and Clint are, with it asking Natasha to see her memories with Clint and things of that nature. This all built up to what we would find out later in Black Widow Venomous Issue 1, when at the time Natasha and her symbiote went to infiltrate a secret Alchemax lab. But when they got there, Natasha's symbiote extracted information from the guard. This spooked her symbiote big time, so it left Natasha by herself at this high security secret facility. And I mean, fortunately, this is Natasha Romanoff we're talking about here. She can hold her own against a group of armed men, but when it comes down to cybernetic symbiote tech mini bosses, let's just say she did not advance to the next level. And it was for this reason, with Natasha being by herself, she was not able to finish the mission. So following this, when Natasha went back to the safe house, she had a few choice words for the symbiote. And it wasn't so much the case of her going off or anything like that, but instead she just made it clear to her symbiote that it left her hanging. But once they get into the reason why it bailed on Natasha, she finds out when her symbiote looked into the guard's mind, it saw a scientist using a version of the K chemical to kill another symbiote by burning it from the inside out, which confirmed to Natasha that this Alchemax lab had a version of K-43 there. But before they were even going to consider going back, Natasha knew that her symbiote needed to be as reliable as her in the field, and to do so it was going to need training. And instead of just having the symbiote access Natasha's memories and learn from them, Natasha was like, no, she needed to actually train it, so the symbiote could respond like it's muscle memory or second nature. So to carry out this training, Natasha provided a version of the Red Room in her mind to give her symbiote the rigorous training she had at a young age. And you can kind of see where Natasha's coming from with this logic, since the symbiote is very young as well. Though at the same time, the problem with Red Room training is that it broke more people than it graduated. And even for the candidates that made it through, every development wasn't necessarily all for the better. And it isn't too long before Natasha notices this, when she sees her symbiote struggling, which immediately reminds her of herself. And in a way, it kind of goes back to what Natasha said at the beginning of this series. Because when it started, she said, "It's funny, when I look back on my life, how I got here, I sometimes forget all I had to endure." And when you jump forward to now, she's like, "It's funny, I forgot that training didn't have to be like this. I can do better. I will do better." So for that reason, Widow decided to take a different approach, because she also had friends who helped her over the years. So as a quick rundown, from here the symbiote learned from Jessica Drew how to be flexible, it learned confidence and precision from Hawkeye, it trained with Bucky Barnes, who also taught it not to be overconfident, Nick Fury brought in the espionage tips, and Agent Phil Coulson showed it how to be unassuming and blend in. And for the final test, Natasha taught it how to deal with distractions in the midst of chaos, which from there completed the symbiote's training. So from there, Natasha told it to take some time to think about a name, since together they're Widow, but by itself, the symbiote hasn't had its own name, at least not until now, with her symbiote deciding to go with the name Sliver. So after they bond again, with Sliver having gone through its training, they return to the Alchemax facility, so Widow can have a proper fight with the Symbiotech mini-boss, who they end up taking down rather quickly. But also as a result of Slither's training, Widow's given an upgraded look now that Slither has more experience, so that's also going to be something new for the two of them going forward. But this time around, they make it all the way through this Alchemax facility, and they're able to get their hands on the K chemical, which now makes their mission a success. Now they just gotta get it in the hands of someone they trust. So next, this takes us into Venom War Venomous Issue 1, which starts off with the two of them attending a black market auction. And it's here where they come across Dr. Freck, who's introducing K-42T as a quote-unquote silver bullet to the symbiote mess. And so prior to this, we've talked about some of the different versions of the K chemical. And for the most part throughout the Venom series and the Carnage series, we've been dealing with K-43, which was distributed in a number of different ways. Whether it was the Alchemax accident that leaked it into the water supply, making a ton of people sick and killing many others, or what we saw Liz Allen discover when she found out about her company having a K program experimenting on symbiotes right under her nose. But even with K-43 being the most mentioned up to this point, there's a number of other applications of the K chemical that just haven't been named. But as of Venom War Issue 1, we found out through Meridius that K-44 is the most advanced version out there. So with that said, just think of K-42 as an earlier offshoot of what they've developed along the way, because we'll see where this is heading in just a little bit. But in the here and now, this is being advertised as a weapon to neutralize symbiotes. So they bring in this guy who they're about to bond with this random symbiote material, and I highly doubt this dude volunteered for this. Like, they probably just grabbed him off the street and was like, "Hey man, we're gonna give you a fresh haircut on TikTok." And the next thing you know, he wakes up with a needle in his arm. But they end up doing this. They inject this symbiote material into him. But when they do, he just turns into this mindless symbiote monstrosity that looks like it just crawled out of the upside down. So immediately, Natasha and her symbiote, they leap into action, because it's rather clear that this thing's getting ready to kill everybody in the room. So first they end up grabbing Dr. Freck and webbing him to the wall because they need him alive. And for a moment here, Natasha tries to get Slither to communicate with this thing, but Slither just lets her know that that's not possible because it's not even sentient. So for a moment, Natasha starts to go back to Dr. Freck so he could tell her what they should do next, but Slither tells her no because he's just going to want them to kill it. But before they can even get to him to hear him out, this thing grabs Widow, and it's right here with her symbiote, Slither, tells her that it has an idea, so it ends up removing itself from Natasha to place itself on this mindless symbiote, allowing the two of them to split up just for a brief moment so Natasha can go and grab the K42T chemical from Dr. Freck, rebond with Sliver, and use the chemical to stop this mindless symbiote monstrosity. And it ends up working because it breaks this thing down while still managing to keep this guy alive. And it's one of those things that kind of has me thinking about what Liz Allen mentioned in the Carnage series when she spoke about versions of the K chemical that would make people immune to symbiotes. So it's possible we might be seeing some of that here, though we're not told in the moment. And after confirming this guy's still alive, Widow then makes her way back to Dr. Freck, demanding that he gives her the rest of his K42T, but he just tells her he only made enough for the auction. So he ends up giving her a book with the formula, so Widow destroys it, and she tells Slither to remove it from his mind as well, and only leave him with the guilt. And when they leave, there's even a moment here when Natasha asks Sliver, how much of his memory did you leave him with? And Sliver's just like, he'll live, but not well, which is really messed up. But at the same time, he might find a bright side to it, because now he can go back and play all his favorite games for the first time. And just after this, the two of them make their way to Alchemax, and as they move in closer, Slither tells Natasha that it senses another symbiote, which is a really interesting choice of words, because as it turns out, it's Flash Thompson. So for a moment, Flash and Natasha are like, well, what are you doing here? No, what are you doing here? They do that whole routine. So they start to catch up, with Flash telling Natasha about Carnage coming back, Flash is introduced to Slither, so on and so forth. But at the same time, with Slither just saying that there's a symbiote nearby, and I could be looking too deep into this, but in a way it just reminds me of what Carnage said recently about him and Flash being very similar, as far as the whole idea with Cletus Cassidy dying and coming back with his consciousness in the Carnage symbiote, and it's like King in Black gave Flash a similar return as well. But like Carnage said, since Flash has been back, he doesn't truly understand what he is. Not completely. So here's hoping that we get the fullness of that answer sometime soon. But while they're in the middle of getting each other caught up, an alarm goes off at Alchemax, so they make their way down to the sublevels. But as they do, Flash warns Widow that they better be careful, because it's down here where they keep the real nasty stuff. So again, Natasha tries to get Slither to talk to these symbiotes, only for Sliver to tell her that it can't, because they're all just like the one at the auction. They're all mindless, and there's a ton of them. So to handle this, Flash is like, okay, that's a cold storage. If we can lure them there, maybe we can slow them down. So next, they try to save what scientists they can here by telling them to head for the exit behind them, while Widow and Flash fight their way closer to the cadaver storage in hopes of leading the zombiotes closer so the cold temperatures can slow them down. But as soon as they open this thing up, Widow gets knocked back, and out from this storage comes a whole horde of even more zombiotes. And these things are a lot like what we saw with Lee Price, just before he was absorbed by Meridius. But this time around, it's more like a zombiote outbreak. Alright, so coming back, we continue with future Dylan Brock, who's traveled back to the past to get a sample from Molten Man, which he's successful at doing. Though at the same time, Dylan was trying to pull this off without causing too much of a disruption in the timeline, because there's a short list of specific things that he needs to do here to correct his future without causing other problems. And well, this kind of went out the window when Spider-Man caught him extracting a sample from Molten Man in a back alley. And when Spider-Man tries to stop Dylan, to Dylan's surprise, this sample that he pulled from Molten Man, it's heavy, and it's moving on its own within this glass container, so that's throwing him off too. But with Peter showing up here, Venom comes out. So for a moment, he's like, I'm gonna teach Spider-Man a lesson. So next, they get into it for a moment here. But this whole time, Dylan Brock, he's trying to tell Venom that he shouldn't do this, and he shouldn't engage. And part of that has to do with the fact that at this point, Peter's not supposed to know about Venom, or even symbiotes for that matter. Because in this scenario, with future Dylan and the Venom symbiote traveling to the past using Doom Tech, this places them in a past connected to the main continuity future. So if Peter already knows about the symbiote prior to Secret Wars, this could either create a really messy domino effect, or we just might have a situation where the symbiote suppressed these memories in Peter's mind from the moment he put on the suit, and we'll see these memories come rushing back much later, which is basically what we got in Venom Wars Spider-Man issue 1, when Peter put on the Venom symbiote and didn't bond with it, just put it on. And the number of unfamiliar memories just came rushing in, with one of those memories happening in this issue that we're covering, and others revealing deeper secrets that Peter has yet to learn. But we'll talk more about that in another video soon. But also, as things continued throughout Venom War, and especially in the Venom War Spider-Man series, I want you guys to keep in mind what we heard the eventuality tell Eddie Brock, which was essentially the idea of Eddie Brock one day becoming the eventuality and potentially becoming Knull, because at that time, like he was told, this all was supposed to be Spider-Man. He was born for this role, but life happened, it became Eddie instead, and here we are. So in the here and now, this seeming like something small and insignificant, or perhaps even an oversight, it's really just the tip of the iceberg that's leading us to a larger story that's been building up for a long time, that'll tell us the true connection between Peter Parker and the story of how he was supposed to go forward as the King in Black. But we'll get around to that. But as it stands at this point in time, the cat's out the bag. Venom's calling Peter by his first name, and you just can't put the cat back in the bag at this point. So Dylan just leans into it and he tells Peter that he's gonna miss his graduation, which for a moment has Peter like, well, do I know you? So Dylan tells him not yet, but at some point in the future, we will become something like friends, or at least allies. And mind you, this whole time, Molten Man's making a run for it. So Dylan tells Peter that he needs to catch Molten Man, because that's what he's supposed to do today. So Dylan's like, don't worry about me, just stop him. And Peter's like, oh no, I can do both. So he just webs up Dylan and he goes after Molten Man, which then allows the history to play out very closely to how it should have, with the Eddie Brock of this time showing up with Anne Wang to snap a picture of Spider-Man stopping Molten Man, but also with Dylan very easily getting out of Peter's webbing. So as he leaves, he also gets another glimpse of his parents, Eddie Brock and Anne Wang, and Dylan never knew the two of them were so happy before. But this doesn't go on for long, because the Venom symbiote reminds Dylan that they have work to do, which from here now involves getting the help of Doctor Strange. So they make their way to the Sanctum Sanctorum, but when they get there, Dylan quickly notices this place doesn't have any doorknobs. So he makes a bit of a remark, calling Doctor Strange an insufferable dork, and it's here where Strange responds, after hearing what Dylan said. So at first, Dylan gets straight to it. He tells Doctor Strange that he's come for his help. So Strange is pretty much like, why wouldn't I help? I'm a dork, right? But then after this, when the symbiote says a slick remark about Strange, Steven's just like, oh, yeah, I can hear you too, demon. So Strange quickly pulls the symbiote from Dylan and he contains it. And at this time, Strange still believes this is a demon he's dealing with. And I mean, I don't blame him. But this just goes back to the fact that at this point in the past, he's never seen a symbiote before. And as soon as he does this, we find out that future Dylan cannot live without the symbiote. So future Dylan tries to quickly explain to Strange that this isn't a demon, it's a symbiote and he needs it to survive. And he assures Strange that the symbiote won't hurt him, but he's gotta let it out, or Dylan's a goner. So Strange allows the Venom symbiote to get out and it goes right back to Dylan right away. And now that he's extremely curious about who Dylan is and what exactly is going on, Steven offers Dylan some tea so they can sit down, have a talk, and get him up to speed with what exactly is going on here. But sometime later as they're having this discussion, a man approaches the sanctum outside, but he doesn't come to the door, he doesn't intervene in any kind of way. So as Dylan and Strange are talking, Strange knows that someone is out there. So he asks Dylan who's the guy outside, but Dylan doesn't know about him. He just tells Strange no one knows that we're here. Though in the case of the stranger, it is undoubtedly Meridius, and most likely the version of Meridius who we saw Eddie send much further back in time. But going back to the conversation between Strange and Dylan, Strange lets him know that he's not sure if he can help him with this weapon that he needs. And with Dylan mentioning Chthon within this conversation, it has Strange wondering how does he know of that name. So Dylan lets him know, you told me about him. So Steven, he pretty much presses X for doubt, and he tells Dylan that's highly unlikely. So Dylan just tells him, you told me to show you the future if you did not believe me. So at first, Strange gives him a bit of a warning here, because when he goes into Dylan's mind, there won't be any secrets kept. So Dylan just tells him to go ahead, because he hasn't had a secret in a long time. So from here, this takes us into another flashback, into this Dylan's past, which is the far future. And it's here where we see a conversation between Dylan and the much older Doctor Strange at the Sanctum Sanctorum, where future Strange is looking even more like a wizard. And in this post-apocalyptic future, this Strange believes even if they defeat these machines, their victory will be pointless because humanity is pretty much gone. And he even tells Dylan there is no victory here. All we can hope for is to kill them along with us, which is a very hopeless perspective, and the younger Doctor Strange is seeing himself talk like this through the eyes of Dylan in this memory. So he's able to pick up the lack of hope in his future self, and even the fear that's building up towards what's coming next. So of course, in this memory, Dylan tells future Strange that they can't give up. So this Strange tells him he's not saying that they should, but at this point they've ran out of time. So he lets Dylan know since he has the backpack with the Doom tech, he's got to go back and undo this. And Strange tells him when he goes back into the past to find the younger version of him. And there's a really crazy moment here where the older Strange looks into Dylan's eyes and he's able to see his younger self watching this memory through Dylan. And it's something small, but it's just one of those things that I like about Doctor Strange. Anytime a writer gets to create a trippy experience like that. And not only for Doctor Strange, but really just any time travel story done right. But nonetheless, it's here where the older Doctor Strange tells Dylan, I can hold them off, I can buy you time. In return, I expect you to find the courage to do this. You owe us, Dylan. Go now. There is no victory here. And right after that, we just see the older Doctor Strange take these symbiote machines head on in what is seemingly his final moments in this future, as the Dylan of that time watched, knowing what he had to do next. And as the Strange from the past sees this happen through Dylan's eyes, this undoubtedly convinces him that he needs to get involved. So the younger Strange tells Dylan, maybe future me knew something I do not. The flickering realms are treacherous. Getting there is easy enough. Surviving is a different matter. So following this, Dylan and Strange make their way, but Doctor Strange makes sure to tell Dylan when they arrive not to make any deals with demons, because they'll make it sound like a sweet offer at first, only for you to find out later that it's something you'll regret for the rest of your life, or maybe even longer. And when they arrive, they're greeted by two little girls who seem to be harmless, as they point to Strange, Dylan, and Venom, telling the three of them to get down from there. So of course Dylan's like, how do we do that? Only for the girls to tell them, we'll help you if you like, for a price. So right away Strange reminds Dylan what he told him before, no deals. And one of these girls is like, a double-minded man is unstable in all they do. Which right there just had me like, what in the book of James chapter 1 verse 8 is going on here? But not long after they come here, Strange is able to get himself down and then help Dylan down shortly after. And Strange goes on to tell the two of them that they're looking for the heart. So he asks these two kids, air quotes, if they know the way. So they're like, yeah, we could show you, for a price. But it's right here where Dylan sees that they've got company incoming, as the darkness peels back and a whole wave of enemies comes rushing in, claiming that Strange and Venom are spies. So at first, even he tries to talk to these guys by telling them we are not spies, we seek he who holds darkness. So these little girls are like, we can show you a shortcut, for a price. It will be something cheap, something little, your middle name perhaps, Vinny, Vincy, Vincent, which of course they do not go for, because like Doctor Strange said, if you make a deal with the demon, they gonna scam you out of your soul, and the next thing you know, you got spiritual transactions in other dimensions. And after that, you find yourself looking at your balance like, man, when did I do a wire transfer to Beelzebub? So of course, with them not making a deal, this leads to Strange and Venom having to fight their way through these guys. And before Strange can even tell them that they've come here to look for Chthon, one of these guys just cuts off Strange and he tells him, and by the way, I forget what these guys are called again, one of you could remind me in the comments, because I feel like the last time we talked about them was in the Doom Darkhold story, but one of these guys more or less tells Strange that he has no better chance of getting Chthon's attention than they do, because he says, we all seek the Lord, but our lives are but vain attempts to catch his attention. So Strange tells him like, hey, I'm not one of you, I am no Darkhold spawn, I am Dr. Stephen Strange, and I demand to see your Lord. But as soon as Strange says this, the ground starts shaking, and the two little demon girls are like, Vincent, save us, Vincent, don't let us die. But following this, the ground raises from beneath them, while creating a stairway heading down below, as a voice rises from underneath, saying, visitors, bring them to me. Alright, so coming back, we continue with Dylan and Doctor Strange, who've made their way to the Flickering Realms, where now they've been granted the opportunity to speak to Chthon. But as they make their way, Doctor Strange makes sure to give Dylan the heads up on Chthon, because he tells him Chthon is more than a demon. He is to demons what the universe is to humanity. So to say the least, he's letting them know they're stepping into a whole nother league here. But Strange also goes on to say, he will ask you for something in return for his help. It might seem small, but whatever it is will be valuable. So for a moment here, Dylan's like, I have nothing to give, only for Strange to tell him, you have plenty. You have things he has never had, and he will take them if he can. He will twist any deal, take all he can. Be careful, Brock. And as they make their way down, suddenly Dylan recognizes where he is, as Strange and the two girls disappear, and he finds himself back in what seems to be his dystopian future, as he stands before Chthon, who for whatever reason has presented himself to Dylan as if he's got a photo shoot after this meeting with either Prada or Ralph Lauren, not sure. But as Chthon reveals himself here, he tells Dylan that he knows he's come for his help, and he's also aware of this dystopian future being Dylan's fault to some degree, because he tells him, I know why you're here, Dylan Brock. You broke the world. And at this point, Dylan Brock believes that he's been taken back to his future. But at the end of the day, this is just Chthon setting the stage for a bargain. But at the same time, this isn't just an illusion, because Dylan can still very much feel any and everything that happens here. So just moments later, when they hear the machine symbiotes coming, Dylan's asking, is this real? Are we back? Is this real? And Chthon just tells him it's as real as anything. Which is really a way of answering the question without answering the question, because again, all of this just serves the purpose of convincing Dylan that the stakes are real, so Chthon could get the most out of this bargain. Because next, when these symbiote machines show up, Venom already knew that there's 3 incoming, with them sounding just like they remembered. And when they get there, Dylan and Venom know that they're not equipped to take on 3. So Dylan decides to lead them off while loading explosives and using shockwaves, just like they would have in their future in a situation like this. And in this instance, it nearly gets the best of them, just before Chthon steps in to give Dylan a hand and continue their conversation. Because next, Chthon tells him, so let me get this straight. The half symbiote, half machines came along, and you thought nukes would be the answer. So for a moment here, Dylan, he begins to explain more about it, but he stopped right there because Chthon goes on to say, don't sweat it. We've been taking bets on how long it would be before humanity nuked themselves to oblivion. I had my money on 1962. So close, you know? Which again, this is just Chthon trying to throw Dylan off with the wordplay, alongside of the chaotic demonstrations. But right here, Dylan just brings things back to the topic at hand, because he asks, Chthon, will you help us? Will you help me? We have to stop this. So he tells Dylan, I don't know. Your plan is as desperate as it is feeble. Tell me, you went back in time, and you saw your parents, right? When you were there, why didn't you just shoot him? Why not just kill Eddie Brock? Would it not be easier? You can do it now if you want. And I gotta say, the tricky thing here with Chthon is the idea of him presenting Dylan with illusions and blending that in with a real deal and a real opportunity. So even now, Dylan's not sure if he's looking at his actual parents, who he saw not too long ago when he traveled back in time. But once again, as it turns out, Chthon is just asking a question here, because he goes on to tell Dylan that he's asking something of him, but Dylan's not willing to give anything up. But we know that's not true, because before Dylan traveled back in time, he made it very clear that even in the case where this mission is a success, he's not expecting to survive the outcome. And he's very much of that same mind here, because he says, I am. If I thought it would help, I would take my father's life. I would give up my own life in an instant. Which again, for old man Dylan, we know he's willing to give his own life. But I imagine had he done this by killing Eddie Brock, it would have caused much larger ramifications heading forward. Because on top of that, there's certain restrictions that future Dylan has to fall in line with to make sure his mission's a success. Because just going along with the way that Doom described time travel, which is what future Dylan has placed his plan upon, the events that taken place in the past, they're either considered to be dead butterflies or living butterflies, where if it's considered to be dead, that event or that moment isn't significant enough to make a change that will hold in the future. So for old man Dylan, he has a plan that's comprised of him collecting specific items from dead butterfly moments so they can be used in a living butterfly moment to make a change that would stick and prevent his future from ever happening. And I wanted to make sure to bring this up here, because what's more important than Dylan's specific plan is when it's implemented in that living butterfly moment. And I want you guys to keep that in mind here, because we'll come back to that later on. But just keep in mind in the here and now that Dylan's willing to do whatever it takes within those parameters to stop that future from happening. So he tells Chthon, there's nothing I would not give to stop this. So of course Chthon tells him, that's good to know, because he's just setting up Dylan for the negotiations to come. But while they're still here, there's a few things that happen. Because for one, you have Doctor Strange's warnings echoing through Dylan's mind, while at the same time Dylan's trying to figure out if this is some sort of test. But right here, Chthon says, you are no longer human, are you? Honestly, I cannot tell where the human ends and the symbiote begins. And really, there are a few things to keep in mind with Chthon saying this. Because for one, Dylan was never fully human. He was born half human, half symbiote. And secondly, for whatever reason, in the future, things came to the point where Dylan, he can't survive without the Venom symbiote. So as far as Chthon is aware in the here and now, he's just talking to someone who's no longer human. And he's not paying much of any attention to the Venom symbiote. But as the chaos continues, once again, Dylan's thrown into emergency mode when he sees a couple of kids running towards them being chased by the symbiote machines. And it's right here where Chthon makes Dylan an offer, which is conveniently placed in the middle of this chaos, where he tells Dylan, alright, I'll do something. You choose, I'll save them or you. So right away, Dylan doesn't even think about it. He just goes to save the kids because he doesn't know if this is real or not. But what he does know is that he can't just tell Chthon yes here, because that'll just be an extra deal that's going to cost Dylan and not contribute to the future he's trying to prevent. So effectively in this moment, it's almost like Dylan resists the temptation. But as these symbiote machines close in, Chthon slips away and he observes. And for a moment here, he's just watching and waiting for Dylan to beg, change his mind, or falter in his resolve. But that does not happen. So following this, it's here where we head back to Strange, and we find Dylan, who's back, along with Chthon, who's no longer putting on the appearance. And it's here where he tells Strange, "You were a fool for coming here. I was before man. I will be after. Why would I involve myself in the downfall of your world?" So Strange asks him, "Does it not bother you that humanity will end without your permission or influence?" Which is really just Strange trying to provoke Chthon into giving his assistance, but the Elder God wasn't born last millennium, so he catches it right away. But even still, there's a level of honesty in what Strange is saying, because for Steven, he's seen his future, and he knows of his own failure that'll eventually come. So he tells Chthon, "It haunts me. I'm asking that you give us a chance. Give him a chance. He stepped in between you and danger, Chthon." Which again just proves even more how badly they need this. But also in this moment here, Dylan, he checks on Venom, and the symbiote responds by tightening its hold, almost like saying it's still there without saying it's there. And it's a very important detail at this time, because prior to this point, Chthon made it clear that he knows Dylan's not 100% human, though he's not sure where the human ends and the symbiote begins. And it's almost like when Venom noticed this, the symbiote didn't want to say anything else, because now it's time for Chthon to tell Dylan what he wants in exchange for his help. And with how this goes, it is crazy, because they both kind of screw each other over here. Because Chthon says, "Very well, Dylan Brock, I will help you for a price." So Dylan asked, "What will you have of me?" So Chthon's like, "What do you say, girls?" And they just start going off, saying, "I will have your first love, and all you know of your mother. I will have the music you know, and your friendships. I will have your taste. I will have your dreams at night." And finally Chthon says, "I will have your name, Dylan Brock." And just before Dylan answers, Strange tells him, "Remember what I said." So Dylan asks Chthon, "And if I give you all this, you will infuse your magic in the weapon and send us both back to the Sanctum Sanctorum safe and sound?" So Chthon tells him, "I will," to where then Dylan's like, "I accept." So Chthon reaches out his hand, and he gives Dylan a portion of his chaos magic as he agreed. And just before Dylan and Strange go, Chthon tells him good luck. "I find that I hope you will make it, old man." Which is funny because one, it's like Chthon just wants to see where this is gonna go. But also, Chthon's calling him old man, because future Dylan no longer has the name Dylan, let alone Dylan Brock. And after this, when him and Strange make their way back to the Sanctum Sanctorum, safe and sound, it's not until now where the old man starts to realize what exactly is wrong and what exactly is missing. Because right here, Strange tries to wake him up by saying Dylan multiple times and asking him, "Dylan, are you okay?" Only for the old man to respond by saying, "Who is Dylan?" So now it's kind of like, yep, that's definitely gone. So next Strange asked, "Old man, do you still want to continue this journey?" So he tells Strange, "Of course, I just don't know how to get there." So Strange opens the portal for him, but just before the old man steps through, he asks Strange, "The girls, who were they?" And Strange tells him they were all him, I think. Which right there is what I was talking about as far as Chthon getting over on him. Because with having the little girls throwing all the extra requests, it allowed Chthon to take way more than he would have had it just been him. So from here as the old man steps through the portal, he tells Strange, "Thank you. I don't quite remember your name, but thank you, wizard." And as he leaves, that right there just lets Dr. Strange know that he was truly a friend, since giving up his friendships was part of the bargain. So following this, next he just finds himself walking for days while asking himself, where is he? What am I supposed to do? He walks and he curses the gods, yet he keeps going. And it comes to the point where on the 7th day, Venom tells him, "We have been here before. I recognize that tree." So right here, the old man, he loses it for a moment, because he's like, what trick is this? Are we walking in circles? I can't do this anymore. I can't walk any further. I'm done. But then he realizes the world's gonna go on with or without him. So what else can he do but continue? But as he goes on, we're told he does not feel the eyes watching him, nor does he feel the subtle shift in the world. The hunger screams inside him, and somewhere, someone is listening. The old man feels safe. The old man feels welcome. And this whole time that he's moving, he keeps saying, "I am old man. I am Venom. I broke the world, but I am going to undo it." Almost as if he's speaking from what's left of him at this moment. But this welcome feeling ends up leading him to this small cabin, where the front door is open, so he steps in, and he feels at home. And there's just one person who's in here, but behind them there's this table full of food. And of course the old man's hungry, but Venom doesn't like this one bit cause something don't feel right. So the old man sits down and he starts stuffing his face. But this whole time he can't taste anything because much like his name, that was also part of the deal. But then it's here where Venom feels someone looking through their mind. And this person who's searching through the old man's head, they're not able to find a name, no mother, no friends, only a purpose. Glorious purpose. But at this point, the stranger, they've crossed the line enough to offend the old man and bring out Venom. And it's here where they discover that this stranger was Loki, who just wanted to take a peek in there, that's all. But yeah, even though this old man lost a whole lot by making this deal with Chthon, because he's not completely human, half symbiote. This allowed the Venom symbiote to slide in under the radar, which made it so that both sides of this deal were actually getting over on each other. But as it stands in the here and now, we really don't know how much was lost in the case of Old Man Venom, or even how Loki will fit into the next stage of this going forward. But all of this has set things up where it has me on the edge of my seat. Alright, so going into this, we pick up where we left off, with Peter and the Venom symbiote getting intercepted by a number of obstacles on their way to Grand Central Arena, where Eddie Brock is currently holding the symbiote smack down to the Sentry. But along the way, we saw Peter and the Venom symbiote run into the Hobgoblin and get help from MJ, who is now the superhero known as Jackpot. But to make things worse, this all escalated when they were confronted by the Arachnio. And as soon as this happened, the Venom symbiote told Peter that there's no way they're gonna have a chance against this thing unless the two of them are bonded together, because prior to this, Peter only agreed to wear the symbiote and get it to the arena. But now that the Arachnio's been thrown into the mix, symbiosis is the only way they're gonna get through it. So Peter agreed, but he told the symbiote, man, don't make me regret this. Which next leads to Venom telling Peter the origin of the Arachnio. Because all we knew prior to this was that this thing was very strong, it was a legend of Clintar, and even Knull was afraid of it. But it's here in this flashback where the symbiote tells Peter, in our language, the Arachnio is called all hunger, for it can never be filled. Within the Clintar, all are one. It is core to what every young spawn is taught. But all hunger was born of two symbiotes, who committed a heresy and bonded with each other while still attempting to remain themselves. By rejecting oneness, they severed their connection to the hive, becoming their own mad collective, a hive within a hive, with every consciousness not adding to the whole, but interrupting discordant. The Arachniote is our warning. The Arachniote is love. The Arachniote is death. So it's here where Peter tells the symbiote, you're afraid. Aw, Benny, you should have said that up front. If you want to bond to get over your jitters, take it from someone who's afraid literally all the time. Fear is what heroes are made of, and we are heroes. And I want you guys to kind of keep in the back of your mind, there's a number of times throughout this where we almost get the "we are Venom" phrase from either Peter or the symbiote, though it never quite comes together. And there's a reason for that we'll get around to in a little bit, but for now just keep it in mind. So following this, when they take the fight to the Arachnio alongside of MJ, aka Jackpot, and I'm not going to spend too much time on her involvement here, but it does play into the whole King in Black thing, so just bear with me. But during all this chaos, MJ's new boyfriend, Paul, he's like her guy in the chair, he's the dude that came up with the tech that's in her suit, and through the course of this, she's going back and forth with him while talking to Peter, and it makes for a conversation between Peter and the Venom symbiote, where the symbiote realizes that Peter still misses MJ. So just keep that in mind as we head forward. But to take care of this Arachnio, MJ rolls her different chances so she can have something to use against this thing, and it ends up working out well enough, with Paul kind of rigging things on his end to raise her chances of getting frequency-based powers every time. The only issue is her gauntlets have a limiter to keep her from dying, so to bypass that limiter and get more power to face the Arachnio, MJ gets some help from the Venom symbiote, which from here boosts both her power and her probability of hitting the jackpot for her next attack, which as it turns out is pure antimatter to handle the Arachnio and pull out the Hobgoblin, who got sucked in there somewhere. So after seeing this, Peter leaves MJ to it. Him and Venom make their way to Grand Garden Arena, but what Peter doesn't know right now is that this whole situation with the All Hunger, it's not over, and MJ's left to face it all by herself. But as we follow Peter, this takes us into Venom War Part 2, with Peter making his way to the garden. And when Peter gets here, you still have the events taking place at Alchemax HQ that we saw kicking off in Venom War Issue 1. But I'm gonna save this for our next discussion because we gotta stick with Peter on this one, because there's a lot of stuff happening at two different locations and things are escalating in different ways at both. And we see how this unfolds in the garden rather quickly. And it's kind of like, man, what is it with Eddie, Brock, and Gardens? But as soon as Peter gets here, Eddie wants him to hand over the Venom symbiote. And the symbiote wants to talk this over with Eddie, but Peter just lets it know like, hey, you're too close to this. Cause like we saw, the Venom symbiote has a lot of emotions invested towards both sides, both Eddie and Dylan. So Peter just tells the symbiote he'll do the talking. Cause like we talked about before, the main through line of Venom War, it comes down to who has the Venom symbiote when this is all said and done. This is why Eddie doesn't want Dylan to have it, because he believes Dylan bonding with the Venom symbiote is gonna lead to Venom World. And Dylan's trying to keep Eddie from getting the symbiote because he's seen the future where this leads to Eddie going down a path that is very similar to Knull. So throughout Venom War, we've been walking this careful line where it's like, okay, as it would seem, no one individual can handle this. Man, it doesn't matter how good their intentions are. Down the line, eventually it just doesn't end well for everyone else. But right here, Peter, he doesn't hand over the Venom symbiote to Eddie because Eddie don't seem right now. So this ends up leading to Eddie bonding with Bedlam and attacking Peter right away. And keep in mind, at this point, like we saw before, Dylan's already made his way here, along with Toxin, Flexo, and Red Goblin. Normie Red Goblin, just to be clear. But during this fight between Eddie and Peter, Eddie merges with the different symbiote versions of himself, which now really just gets rid of all the multiple Eddies that we had before. As far as Tiro, Wild, Bedlam, they're all just one huge symbiote now. So off to the side, with Dylan figuring out what he's gonna do, it's here where he ends up bonding with both Flexo and Sleeper and becoming the Prince in Black. And it's nothing to scoff at, cause I'd make the argument that Sleeper would have been enough, but with the addition of Flexo, this just takes it to another level. So now with Dylan suited up as the Prince in Black, he confronts his father Eddie Brock in his Mega Bedlam symbiote, which again is still him, though this version of Bedlam is much stronger than the one we've seen up to this point. So now when we have what's essentially the two main opposing sides standing face to face, when Bedlam goes to attack Dylan, Eddie jumps out and he tells Bedlam to stand down because this isn't what Eddie wants. So for a moment here, just when it seems like things are about to calm down and father and son are about to talk this out, Dylan then hears the voice of Doom saying, Flexo, this is the voice of Doom. But he goes on to say, this is the voice of Doom commanding you to remember, Eddie Brock, the so-called King in Black. When the time is right, you will be my hand of vengeance against him, and his own son will be your weapon. Which from here, this just has Flexo taking over by controlling the Prince in Black and making Dylan blast Eddie. And Doom made sure to set this up where it would happen in a moment when Eddie was no longer reinforced by a symbiote, and it would knock Eddie's soul out of alignment with his physical form. So from there, Flexo could finish the job by damaging Eddie faster than he could heal. And really, this is just the moment that Doom was referring to. Back when we saw Doom and Eddie travel to the past, and Doom told Flexo that he would help Doom turn Dylan into a weapon. So Dylan tells Sleeper to do something, but Sleeper's not even able to stop this because Flexo's much older and much stronger. And I mean, on top of that, you also have Doom's involvement, where his influence is stronger than Flexo's control over himself. But it's crazy here because Flexo just handles Sleeper like it's nothing. So of course Peter gets involved, only to get his face slammed into the ground by Bedlam, who's now made his way back to the fight. And this causes things to get split up for a moment here, because now we got symbiote Spider-Man, Peter Parker, versus Bedlam Pro Max, while over to the side with Normie, the Red Goblin, he's now activated by Kang. And I gotta say, in Normie's case, this is even crazier than what we saw with Doom, because as it turns out, Kang, he built the Rascal symbiote. So this entire time that we've seen Normie with the Rascal symbiote, that whole plot line was orchestrated by Kang, with the symbiote being pulled from Bedlam and programmed with techniques that Kang learned from Meridius. So because of what we saw prior to this in Venom Volume 5, with Kang and Doom arguing about time travel, this was just the start of them realizing that they both were going for the throne. However, both Kang and Doom were doing this according to their individual belief in how time travel works, which like we saw is a very different perspective for both Doom and Kang. Because Kang, he's mastered the science of time, which in a way works against him because he sticks to the rules. Because with mastering the science of time, you're bound within its laws. While on the other hand, when it comes to Doom, he acknowledges the laws of time, but he doesn't consider himself to be trapped in it, because Doom has also adopted a greater degree of magical thinking, allowing him to move through time with more liberty and less consequence. And we saw an example of this when Eddie and Doom traveled back to World War II, where at the time Doom was killing soldiers left and right. And it had Eddie like, man, you're about to wreck the future, only for Doom to tell him that this changes nothing, because the present day, as they know it, it already includes everything that Doom has already done here. And it's kind of trippy. because there's also this whole element of the butterfly effect, because Doom also made it clear that he knows the difference between a dead butterfly and a live one, which really just means there are some things you can change in the past that'll do nothing to the present, nor will they create an alternate timeline. And there are other things, live butterflies, that will either retcon events heading into the future or branch out into an alternate timeline. But this just all goes back to why Doom's time platform has been and probably will always be the peak of time traveling technology in Marvel Comics, and it may very well be the reason why Kang hates him so much. But coming back to the topic at hand, it's here we find out that Kang had long since placed the Rascal symbiote in position to wait for Doom to make his move against Eddie Brock. So when that time came, which is now, Kang could use the Rascal symbiote, aka Red Goblin, aka Normie, to stop Doom and secure his own power in the future. And as a result, it's here where Dylan Brock gets yanked out of Flexo, or as the kids would say, he got yeeted. But following this, when we go back over to Peter, who is getting walked by Bedlam at the moment, while this is happening, there's a moment where Peter gets yanked out of the present. And it's crazy how this is done because he's put back within a fraction of a second, because I mean, this is time travel. But the way this happens, it starts with the Venom symbiote telling Peter that he's gotta let it go, which quickly forces Peter to have to make a choice, because right now both Dylan and Eddie need Venom. And it's a tough call for Peter to make because he's also concerned about the Venom symbiote too. And it just leads to the symbiote telling Peter, you think this is the last time you will see me, but even if it is, you have to let me go. And when the symbiote says that, this is where it happens. This is where another voice comes in saying, but you don't want that, do you? You know the truth deep in your bones. You love him. And it's right here where Peter's pulled out of the present moment. But in real time, he'll be back before you can bat an eye. It's crazy. But right here with Peter hearing this voice, he's like, wait, you're not Venom. So it responds saying, no, I am eventual. So then Peter's like, making less sense isn't helping anyone. Big scary voice. So it then says, yes, humor. I remember humor. And then for a moment they go back and forth with Peter's spider sense going off and this voice telling him, I thought it was a shield, but it was just a mask. So I didn't have to look at my true face. And right after that, it reveals itself to him, having this huge monstrous spider form. And just going off of what this thing is saying about its spider sense being a mask and hiding its true form, as it would appear this is the eventuality had Peter Parker become the King in Black. And this is where we get into the craziness of not just the eventuality, but also how these entities who exist outside of time can continue to exist once they're created. Because as it stands right now, the eventuality is Eddie Brock and the Venom symbiote in their final form outside of time. And when the universe ends, this final form will be replaced by another who will take this role, and this final form, Eddie, will move on into the next version of the cosmos and either emerge as a new Knull or just enjoy retirement. But in the here and now, Eddie Brock Venom, his final form, it sits in the current role of the eventuality. And when Eddie Brock first met this version of himself, his final form so to speak, it explained to him the responsibilities and the burdens of the eventuality, which in a nutshell just meant that every version of Venom would eventually make its way back to him, because his final form currently sits in the position of the eventuality. But this final form of Eddie Brock also told him that this was not the original plan, because Spider-Man was born for this role. But life happened and he's not here. You are Eddie, you bought the ticket, somebody has to take the ride. So just by going off what we were told prior to this point, Peter Parker was supposed to be the King in Black, but when life happened, so to speak, and he stepped away from that role, his final form lost its position as the eventuality. Because this final form, whether it's Peter's or Eddie's, it exists outside of time. So regardless what happens from the beginning of time to the end, once an eventuality is created, it'll always be out there, regardless of whatever choice Eddie or Peter make. And this is why you can have someone like Meridius, who's your far future version of Eddie Brock, who has existed throughout eons almost twice over. This is why his creation did not destroy Eddie's eventuality. So yeah, just going off what we're told here, I believe that's why it only tells Peter I am eventual, and it explains to him how its spider sense was just a mask, because with it showing up here, that in itself is proof that Peter became the King in Black at some point. So what it ends up doing is revealing to Peter the future where that plays out if Peter continues to hold on to the Venom symbiote, because it tells him, come little spider, hold fast to the power of Clintar, unlock yourself from the veil of time, behold the world to come. Rip away your human skin and see the King in Black beneath. Because once again, this is a power that operates beyond time. So what we end up doing here is taking a look at how things are set to play out if current day Peter holds on to the Venom symbiote. Because it's here where he goes on to say, "From world to world, my web stretches through the void. I give form to infinity and sit at the center of the stars. I am the king of all that remains in this empty webbed universe, and I've come a long way from queens. The few who remain beyond my control now marshal against me. I can sense it. Every one of them, once a friend. Even now, they are so very brave. I wish it hadn't come to this. It's the kind of thing I've heard tyrants say across centuries, but now in this terrible moment, I mean it genuinely. I've been fighting for so long. Villains, heroes, armadas, empires, ever since that day in New York, my so-called victory, Mary Jane's mastery of the Arachneode, our rule as king and queen, until she was consumed. Until our daughter chose the darkness of Groot space over filling her grief. They'll never understand why I protect them, what I lost all those years ago with a single choice. Instead, they rage against the dying of their chaotic galaxy. I have to remind myself in this moment, more than any other, this is my fault." And following this, we see all the remaining heroes of the distant future coming together for one last attack against Peter Parker, the King in Black. In this team, it's a mashup of the Guardians of the Galaxy, Silver Surfer, all being led by the Arachneode. And as they're heading in, they're well aware of Peter's spider sense letting him know that they're all coming. So their minds are made up to forget the man that Peter Parker was and hit him with everything they've got, because this is their one chance and their one and only shot to pull this off. So they head in and they give Peter everything they've got, and they all get wrecked. Because as a King in Black, sure, Peter's powerful, but because he's Spider-Man, equipped with his spider sense, stopping this guy is nigh impossible. And it's eventually going to come to the point where Peter realizes there's only one person who can stop him. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But to me, it's one of the reasons why I feel like this is one of the most important King in Black related stories that we've gotten so far. And we'll dive deeper into why I believe that's the case in just a moment. But as Peter is just wrecking each and every one of these guys, it's not even close. But as the heroes are being destroyed one by one, each of them are saying things like Gamora, she's saying this is for my sister. Star-Lord is like this is for Earth, so on and so forth. And it has Peter, the King in Black, saying yes, exactly. Their memory means everything to me. Their sacrifice will not be in vain, because to Peter, in this future where he took control of everyone, he believed that was the solution, because with this great level of power, they were all his responsibility. And though it came at the cost of him taking down many others who didn't fall in line, Peter sees this attack almost like his hands being forced to slaughter all these guys who he once called his friends. And the main person who he blames for this attack is the Arachneode, because years ago, MJ was the host of the Arachneode. She managed to use it as a symbiote, but later on she died. And at this point, Peter blames the Arachneode for him losing MJ, for him no longer having his daughter May, and robbing them of their place in this future that he's molded. But this current host of the Arachneode, she tells him, "Future? What future? You never trusted anyone after you lost her," referring to MJ. "You blamed yourself, you blamed us, you blamed your daughter." So Peter goes off, telling the Arachneode, "Don't you dare talk about my daughter. You're the reason I lost her." Only for Arachneode to tell him, "You didn't lose her. You just couldn't see." Because for Peter, he thought he saw the whole picture. He can see through the entirety of time. He can see through any symbiote, except for the Arachneode. Because like we learned just a moment ago through the origin of the Arachneode, it's a part of no hive. And that's why to future King in Black Peter, it was a blind spot. So eventually when he kills her here, he finds out that she was trying to tell him that it was his daughter in there. May became the Arachneode after MJ. And it was not that she was killed before, but instead she walked away because she wasn't on board with what Peter was doing as the King in Black. And it's a tragic outcome because in the future, Peter did all of this with the intention of thinking of his family first, only for it to eventually cost him everything. So from here, as modern day Peter gets pulled back to the present, he hears that voice calling, saying, "Come back to me. You are lost in time, but time is a liar. Listen to the voice of the now. It's as you told me. Nothing is eventual." Which right there just lets us know, at some point down the line, future Peter had a conversation with his final form, where it decided to go back and show present day Peter where all this was heading. So in the here and now, Peter could decide to do something different. And that's precisely what he does. because instead of keeping the Venom symbiote like he wanted to, he ends up giving it to both Dylan and Eddie while saying at the end of the day, they are Venom. And it's a crazy turn of events here. But now that we're back in the present and Peter's still dealing with Bedlam, it's here where Peter gets a call from Paul, MJ's current boyfriend, who's calling Peter to let him know that MJ has gone dark in her fight with the Arachnio, which now has Peter like, okay, I need to leave here and go after MJ. Because just a moment ago he saw where that future led had he kept the symbiote, but now he has to go back and save MJ without it, because that's what heroes do. Alright, so coming back, just recently we talked about the events that had taken place in Grand Garden Arena, which involved Doom setting up Flexo decades ago so it would attack Eddie in this precise moment. So for the most part going forward, we're going to focus on what happened outside of the garden and keep all of that separate until the events come back together. But before we do, I also want to mention when we got this moment when Peter was left to figure out what he should do as far as whether or not he should keep the Venom symbiote or give it to Eddie or give it to Dylan. I do gotta say, with how this is set up, we practically get the same moment between 3 different issues. Between Venom War Spider-Man issue 3 showing Peter's consciousness get raptured out of this moment so he could see what would happen in the future if he kept the symbiote, in addition to the events of Venom War issues 2 and 3, which stayed in the present as if Peter didn't blip to the future, see a whole movie of his life and come back, which again I thought was a really cool way to show the Spider-Man King in Black story. But just before we move forward from here, really quickly I want to point out a couple of the factors that weighed into Peter's decision as far as what to do with the Venom symbiote after he decided he wasn't going to keep it. And this mainly comes from Venom War Part 3, because with Peter seeing that Eddie was critically injured, it was clear to him why Eddie needed the symbiote. And Venom didn't disagree, but he was like, man, Dylan needs me too. Because after everything we've seen in the Venom series, 37 issues up to this point, for the vast majority of that, Dylan has been without his father. He's been homeless, an only child, and dealing with everything in between without his father. So now when it nearly seemed like he was going to get his dad back, only for things to take a turn to the point where he almost lost him again. And the emotion in this moment coming from Dylan, it was best expressed in Venom War Part 3. And I wanted to make sure and bring that up since we were more focused on Peter in the last one. And going forward, I do believe the more personal details of Eddie and Dylan's relationship heading into this moment where they were both given the Venom symbiote is going to play a much larger role down the line. And maybe not even in Venom War, because in the grand scope, this event just feels like something fun that's happening to stir up things for the movie, because we already know as soon as this is done, Dr. Doom is taking the spotlight. But aside from this, when we head back over to Alchemax HQ, where like we saw Liz Allen along with Carlton Drake from the Life Foundation, which was recently acquired by Alchemax, were in a meeting that was initially being held to figure out what to do about Eddie Brock taking over the garden. Because keep in mind, this is happening alongside what we saw before, with Eddie Brock taking over the Grand Garden Arena and symbiote Spider-Man making his way there. Because it was during this meeting where Carlton Drake mentioned that Alchemax already had a solution in the works, which is where he then brought in Meridius, who was like your alternate future evil Eddie Brock. And at this time, Meridius presented to the group Chemical K-44, and out of everyone here, Liz Allen, she already knew about Chemical K-43, because throughout both the Venom and Carnage series, K-43 has been the most common version of the K-chemical that we've seen show up, with it mainly being used to just kill symbiotes. But now, after the events of Blood Hunt, Meridius has used the resources of Alchemax to cook up K-44. Because if you guys remember, during Blood Hunt, when we covered the tie-in from Venom issue 33, it was at this time when the Captive reanimated Lee Price, the previous host of the Venom symbiote, to use him as bait to lure in the Venom symbiote who had no host at the time. And the Captive was able to do this by reanimating the symbiote traces that were still in Lee's body, which as a result effectively made Lee Price a zombiote. So long story short, Venom bonded with the zombiote Lee Price to defeat the Captive. But after defeating the Captive, Meridius showed up and he took the zombiote Lee Price from Venom. So after this, Meridius used the samples from Lee Price, which the Captive was able to control, and he added it to K-43. So now, instead of just having K-43 as a chemical solution to kill symbiotes, this introduces K-44, which will create other zombiotes like Lee Price that Meridius can control. And we've already seen the results of K-44 getting out of hand in the Venom War Venomous tie-in. But in the here and now, this is Liz Allen learning about zombiotes for the first time. So she tells Meridius this is no different than the symbiotex, which was a thing in Web of Carnage Misery, that may or may not come back, because the whole thing with future Dylan looks like it's leaning towards that. Because in addition to seeing them in Web of Carnage Misery, we had another one show up heading into Venom War, who was protecting a secret Alchemax facility. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a path to a dystopian future where these things were involved with taking out humanity, or converting people to zombiotes and using them as batteries. Who knows? But either way, it's here in the middle of this conversation where a security guard runs into the room to let them know that the zombiotes have gotten out in the basement lab. So of course Carlton Drake, he goes into panic mode. But Meridius is not bothered because he's in control of this. So he just forces Carlton Drake to consume K-44. And he's just like, take that, take that. So from here, the zombiote Carlton Drake starts infecting and turning everyone else in the room, which from there forces Liz Allen's hand to turn into Misery, which is a symbiote she's had for some time now. That's a hybrid of Anti-Venom and Carnage. And this is something that only a handful of people knew at first, like Dr. Steven and Flash Thompson, and eventually Carnage figured this out as well. But right here where Liz goes to attack and use Anti-Venom against Meridius and these zombiotes, which mind you, she's not even sure about, because she's never fought zombiotes before. But it's here where Meridius draws a water gun, loaded with the original K chemical, to weaken Liz, just before he winds up and punches her out the window. But the funny thing about this is, when Meridius does this, he literally punches Liz out of the Venom War main series and into the Venom War Venomous tie-ins. And it almost feels like in Mortal Kombat when you punch a character through the stage, but in this case he just punched her into another issue. And when this is done, it's here where we see the zombiotes that Flash and Widow ran into in the basement laboratory of Alchemax. They've made their way to the streets. But on top of that, with Eddie's broadcast takeover coming from the Grand Garden Arena being shown on screens all across the city, for a moment here this gives us a bit of a bird's eye view as far as what's going on where, because like I mentioned before, a lot of this is happening at the exact same time. And at this point for Liz, she's finding out much of this information like back to back to back. It wasn't too long ago when she discovered that Alchemax was building the K chemical right under her nose, and fast forward to now it's already a K-44, so as soon as she learned about zombiotes, she's just tossed into the deep end. And as far as the situation with Eddie Brock at the garden, she saw the initial broadcast like everyone else. So now with her seeing Dylan Brock on the huge screen turn into the Prince in Black, she's still trying to figure out what's going on. But as Liz is here on the street level, fighting off zombiotes left and right, back over at Alchemax HQ, Meridius is confronted by Carnage. And it kind of catches Meridius off guard at first because he doesn't recognize Carnage right away. And I mean, I don't know how that is, but he figures it out pretty quick because Carnage is the only person here who didn't turn into a zombio. But what this ends up giving us here is a situation where Carnage has come to Meridius to bargain. And this really just stems from what we saw in the Carnage series and in the Venom War Carnage tie-ins, because prior to this, Carnage was nearly killed by K-43, which then led him to investigating more about it, like we saw in Venom War Carnage. But at the end of the day, this isn't Carnage trying to be Meridius's friend, nor is Meridius trying to be his, because prior to this, Carnage completely wrecked Meridius's garden, and that's not something that Meridius has forgotten. So between the two of them, this is more of a ceasefire than it is any type of alliance of sorts. And we'll go much deeper into that when we get back into Venom War Carnage, but in the here and now with Carnage wanting to make a bargain, Meridius just tells him that he doesn't need him, because as it stands, with Meridius having his zombiotes spread all over the city, they're creating more zombiotes and even more symbiote matter, which will eventually allow Meridius to build another garden, though this time around he tells Carnage that it'll be new and improved, a Venom world, which will be made possible when Meridius obtains the Venom symbiote. While on the other hand with Carnage, he just tells Meridius that he wants the soul of Eddie Brock, which as we know that's been God Carnage's endgame for quite some time. So from here, both Carnage and Meridius just watch the chaos take place from up above, because at this point Meridius just plans to let Eddie Brock tire himself out, so from there he can swoop in and take back the Venom symbiote and get started on building his new garden, using all the symbiote material that the zombiotes have produced. But it's kind of funny how in this moment, Meridius is just telling Carnage his whole plan, and he's even thanking Carnage at this point for showing Eddie the vision that Carnage got from Meridius's mind when he showed Eddie Venom World and asked him what it meant, because Meridius believes this ended up helping him in the larger picture. So he tells Carnage, "I hope there are no hard feelings. I'd hate for us to fall out now." And mind you, throughout this conversation, Carnage keeps calling Meridius Eddie, and Meridius does not like that. So in response, Carnage goes on to say, "I know a winner when I see one, Eddie, and I'm happy to watch you work. But have you really thought of everything?" So of course this has Meridius thinking this is the point where Carnage shows his true colors, and he uses that Necro Spear on him. So Carnage holds it up like, yeah, you know what to do, only for Meridius to hold his ground while saying, yet despite all that power, I'm still standing with my army of zombiotes. But Carnage isn't ready to get it poppin' just yet, cause he tells Meridius, simmer down, Eddie, we're just talking. A nice friendly chat between equals. And as your equal, I wanted to give you a friendly warning that no matter how much you may have rigged the game, there's always a wild card. Which from here, this now has us heading over to Widow and Flash, who are where we saw them last down in the Cadaver Lab underneath Alchemax HQ. Cause last time we saw them in Venom War Venomous issue 1, they had been just overwhelmed by a ton of zombiotes who for the most part were bonded with deceased bodies. But it's here where they're fighting their way out when Flash hits one of these zombiotes and he realizes that his anti-venom is able to cure this guy. So he keeps trying it on a number of other zombiotes, just knocking the black off of them left and right. But it only works in the cases where the host is someone that's still alive. So quickly Widow webs up a makeshift safe room for the scientists, so her and Flash can go after the other zombiotes who are making a break for it through the elevator shaft. And on the way up, Flash, he's able to cure more people. So what they end up doing is just webbing them up and leaving them there, so later on he can just tell Liz to send somebody to come get them. But when they get up to the ground level, it is just chaotic up here, with a ton of zombiotes having made their way out and turning others into more zombiotes. But now with Widow and Flash on the ground, Flash spots Liz, and it's here where Widow learns about Liz Allen having a symbiote. But even more importantly, it's here where Liz tells Flash that she's able to heal people by using her anti-venom. So Flash is like, yeah, I can too, but I gotta punch people. And so Liz tells him like, no, all you have to do is concentrate, which is helpful information for Flash, because now it's not like he has to go around just throwing hands at civilians while screaming in their face, I'm trying to save you. So after this, when they all see on the huge broadcast screens the chaos that's going down at Grand Garden Arena, Liz tells them that she has to stop Eddie, only for Flash to tell her no, because he'd prefer that she'd stay here with Widow, so they can hold off the zombiotes and keep them from spreading, while Flash makes his way to Grand Garden Arena to try and talk some sense into Eddie, which from here now leaves Widow and Liz, aka Misery, to figure out what they're gonna do about this zombiote horde. Alright, so coming back, this picks up after Flash left Liz and Natasha to make his way over to Eddie, because around this time Flash still believed that he needed to talk some sense into him. So now this leaves Misery and Widow at what is essentially ground zero at Alchemax, where it seems like the zombiotes just keep coming, because in addition to the zombiotes that are escaping the lab, where a lot of them were already bonded to different corpses, well, those numbers only multiplied when they spread to the scientists and then the nearby civilians. So the number of zombiotes that are being produced, it's getting out of control. So for a moment here, Natasha feels a bit overwhelmed about it, but fortunately for her, Liz Allen's also here. And much like Flash, Liz has the ability to cure zombiotes as well. And I mean, if the person inside was alive to begin with, because in that case she can use her anti-venom to free them. But if that zombiote only has a corpse inside, then in that case she'll just resort to carnage, since her symbiote is a hybrid of the two. But at this rate, if they're just trying to fight all of them, as more people are being turned and more zombiotes are coming in, the few people they're able to save, they're just gonna get turned again by the overwhelming numbers that are coming. So Natasha tells Liz they've got to find a way to heal them all at once. So Liz lets her know if they can get them all in one place, maybe she can hit them all with the cure at the same time. So after hearing this, Nat tells Liz she's got an idea. But to carry out this plan, they're gonna need a lot of corpses, which takes them back inside of Alchemax and into the elevator shaft, where Natasha and Flash webbed up all the bodies back in Venomous issue 2. But as they're grabbing all these bodies, there's one person here who they web and scare the mess out of, so they're just kind of like, oops, so we thought you were dead, which is kind of messed up. But we already knew there was at least one person who was in here that was still alive, because the plan before when Flash was here was just to leave this to Liz's cleanup crew, so they can save whoever else was left behind and take care of the rest of the bodies. But of course, like we've seen, plans have changed. So what they end up doing is taking this scientist to a safer location as they carry all the corpses to a huge open area so they can lure in the zombiotes. And by doing this, Natasha's hoping that this will even draw in more zombiotes from outside, in addition to the ones who haven't left the building just yet. And once they got it set up, a lot of them go for the bait. So Nat tells Liz to head to the roof so she can do her part, but to lure them in faster, Natasha's got to separate from her symbiote to get more of the zombiotes to chase her in. So at first, Natasha's symbiote, Slither, it tells her that it's concerned because it won't be able to protect her as well as it could if they were bonded together. So right here, Natasha tells Slither, I appreciate that, but I've been protecting myself long before you were a drop of Venom goo. Remember what I taught you. Which right there is just another subtle moment that confirms the Slither symbiote had actually spawned from the Venom symbiote, which was something that was left up in the air for quite some time. And after this, Natasha gets out there and she lures in a ton of zombiotes. But at the same time, she's thinking to herself like, you know what? This will be a lot easier with that symbiote. And it's not even like Natasha's lost a step or anything like that, because her and Slither had pulled off this move before. Whether it was so they could separate, knock out two objectives, and come back together, Natasha's recently had moments like this that remind her what it's like to move on her own. And even though she's still very capable, she can't help but to notice the difference. And after luring in a ton of zombiotes, Widow calls for Slither so they can join back up, only to find out that Slither has been infected by the other zombiotes. And up to this point, Natasha didn't even know this was possible. And from the looks of things, Slither got caught slipping as soon as they separated. So it wasn't even like Natasha had an opportunity to stop this from happening. Meanwhile, when we go back to Liz, who's now made her way to the rooftop, only to find more zombiotes up there, which now creates the problem where Liz needs to clear the roof so she can do her part. And with this happening, it creates a scenario now where on both ends, Nat and Liz, they find themselves deviating from the plan. Where on one hand with Liz, she's handling it quite well, while down below with Natasha, as she's trying to talk sense to her symbiote, Slither, she eventually gets webbed up and pinned down. And I'm convinced had this happened under slightly different circumstances, like if Natasha wasn't trying to reason with the symbiote this whole time, she probably wouldn't have found herself caught up here. But because she was, zombiote infected Slither now has the upper hand. And the reason why Natasha's been trying to reason with her symbiote is because she believes Slither can still hear her in there. Because if it wanted to kill her, she believes that Slither would have done it by now. So in this moment, she tells her symbiote to fight the zombiote and pull its way through. She tells Slither, you can fight this, remember who you are. Meanwhile, when we head back up to the rooftop, it's here where we find out what Liz was supposed to do, because the next thing we see is her head to the fire suppression system and replace the fire suppression foam with her anti-venom so she can distribute it to the zombiotes below. And mind you, at this point, Liz doesn't know that Slither has been infected. And I mean, even if she did, I'm not really sure how she would handle that, though I'm sure she would have a much better chance than Flash at trying. But nonetheless, while Nat's here trying to speak sense into Slither, the symbiote eventually pulls through and it calls her name just before the anti-venom infused sprinklers come on, destroying every zombiote in the room. And I gotta tell you, it makes for a really sad moment, because for the past year, Natasha and Slither had been through a lot. And again, when it comes down to the Venom symbiote family, much like we talked about with Dylan before, being the son of the Venom symbiote, as well as a sibling to Sleeper, Carnage, and Toxin. Back when Dylan first showed up, I was always like, I'd like to see somebody acknowledge this. And over time, we got that. So now that the Slither symbiote's gone, I'm hoping that it's not something that's just gone and forgotten, especially after we saw how skeptical Dylan was about Natasha even being a host for this newborn symbiote. So yeah, now that Slither's gone, Natasha, she's not able to mourn the symbiote just yet, because in the here and now, she still needs to help these people who were recently freed from the zombiotes. So that's what she does next. And not long after that, when Liz makes her way down from the roof, she asks Nat if she's okay, and Natasha tells her that Slither's gone. So Liz gives Nat her condolences, and she takes full accountability for all of this. And she tells Nat, going forward, she's going to be the leader that Alchemax needs right now, which of course means that she's going to have to answer to a lot of this. But Liz says that she'll be ready. And as Natasha leaves, she tells Liz, your plan worked. I guess I should be happy about that. Slither and I, we both did what we had to do. They were a good student. As an Avenger, I sometimes have to make tough calls. Sometimes that means losing someone you care about, someone you trusted in the field. That Liz Allen's pretty damn brave. No wonder Flash likes her so much. I know she wouldn't likely go for the superhero thing, but we should think about calling her the next time Galactus shows up. And I gotta tell you, when Natasha said that, I was like, hey, okay, chill out. Because I understand, Natasha, you just had a traumatic experience, so I'm gonna let that slide. But with how this ends, it's teased like it's not really the ending for Slither. And I mean, to be honest, I really hope that it isn't. Because in spite of what Dylan thought about Natasha being its host, and him thinking she wasn't the best choice, I really felt like she was perfect for the symbiote. Because I mean, her name's already Black Widow, like come on. But yeah, coming out of Venomous and going back into the rest of Venom War, the death of Sliver is done in a way where it's like this is more than likely not the end. And if anything, it's just the end of the Black Widow symbiote saga for now. But with how this played out, I really wish we would have gotten a symbiote Black Widow story. And I mean, we kind of did with Black Widow and Hawkeye, which is a 4-part miniseries, but I still think it would have been nice if we got something like a solid 10-issue run that might have explored more about the symbiote conspiracy. But yeah, that's just wishful thinking at this point. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Alright, so jumping into Venom War Deadpool. These first couple of tie-ins, they start out about as crazy as you would expect. Because for starters, this is happening alongside of what we talked about with Venomous, which so far we've more or less just blended in with the Venom War Zombiotes issues. But I really like the way this kicks off when we head over to Deadpool, because at first he's having this whole guilt trip and talking about how this is all his fault. Much like what we saw Peter do back in King of Black, but in this case with Deadpool, he's just like none of this would have happened had I never found that symbiote during Secret Wars, which as we know is a direct reference to Deadpool Back in Black, which we covered on the channel like 7 years ago, something like that. And I have a link in the description for anyone who needs to go back and check it out. But at the time, Deadpool Back in Black, it gave us a story of how Deadpool got the symbiote before Peter. He found out it was alive, he discarded it, and he just let Peter walk in and do the same thing without giving him any kind of warning, only for him to eventually end up back in the symbiote later on. Hence the whole Deadpool Back in Black at the time. So yeah, I just thought it was nice that we got that reference. But in the here and now, this whole zombiote situation, it is not going well for him. He's telling civilians not to worry, everything's gonna be okay, only for them to find out seconds later that everything's not okay. And then on top of that, you have the whole situation where he's trying not to kill the zombiotes who still have living hosts in them. So yeah, in addition to the insane numbers, there's a lot of things he's trying to juggle here. And for a moment, he gets a form of a solution when he's joined by Princess, who's a symbiote clone of Carnage that was created for world domination, but is actually very nice, as well as Andy Benton, who Deadpool refers to as silent but deadly. Where in her case, like we saw in Extreme Carnage, Andy was captured by Alchemax, nearly killed by the Phage symbiote, to where soon after she was reunited with the Scream symbiote, which nearly died itself, but after Dr. Steven combined it with a sample of anti-venom and gave it back to Andy, after bonding with this new hybrid symbiote, they became Silence. So now with Andy and Princess, this gives him a bit more help in the fight, but also with Andy having anti-venom, she's able to cure the zombiotes who have living hosts. But again, there are just so many coming that it almost makes the effort seem hopeless. But when they notice a pack of zombiotes trying to get to a school bus, Deadpool's just like, okay, well, we have to save them. But then he thinks for a moment like, okay, well, why are these kids even out here at this time? And then he realizes that they were clearly on a field trip where they went to the circus. And he realizes this just before a ton of zombiote circus animals come rushing out, led by a zombiote elephant. So right here, Andy, she tells Deadpool to handle the undead elephant, because she's gonna go help the kids in the bus. And it's funny because she has this wrench she's been fighting with the whole time, so when she gets to the bus and she finds a bunch of the kids are already turned to zombiotes, for a moment she starts going on about how she hates kids, especially zombiote kids. And right here, Deadpool's like, don't look, avert your eyes. My buddy's going to bash children with a wrench while I resort to animal cruelty. So of course, zombiote Mufasa's not having that. But for me, these are just some of the things I was glad to see in a Venom War Deadpool tie-in. Because in the larger picture, it's not like the Deadpool tie-ins are stealing the show. But if I had to make a list of things I wanted to see, I gotta say, it feels like Deadpool's going for every last one. But in the middle of this chaos, Andy, she ends up curing one of these kids as Deadpool gets his arm bitten off by zombiote Mufasa. But the kid that Andy just saved ends up getting bitten and turned again as the piece of Deadpool's arm that got bitten off gets taken by a zombiote. And this right here was like the clear sign that let Deadpool know that they're in over their heads. So as him and Princess are escaping, Deadpool calls Andy to come over his way. And when she sees him crawling in the sewer, she's like, what are you doing? So he tells her, what does it look like I'm doing? I'm escaping, because the truth is they need to regroup. So of course Andy's just like, there's people up there who need our help. So Deadpool tells her, not sure if you've been keeping score, but we weren't doing anybody favors in the helping hand department. In fact, I'm officially down one hand. We need to catch our breath. And he also lets her know that this isn't just some random retreat, but also they've come down here because he has what he would call friends in low places. as he goes on to lead them to the Monster Metropolis, which is home to the Legion of Monsters. And it's really just more of an underground city located in the Morlock tunnels where any monster is welcome to come and live some kind of a normal life down here. But with Deadpool retreating to the Metropolis, he's not exactly welcomed here. And we can tell because as soon as they arrive, Frank calls him out when he tells Wade that he abandoned the Metropolis and laid claim to another monster kingdom instead, which I believe goes back to the whole thing from the Deadpool 2016 series when he married Shikla, only to later have her leave him for Dracula, where in Dracula's case, he just wanted to take control of all the monsters, who at this point preferred to have their independence. So for a long time, Deadpool was seen to have been on the wrong side of that conflict, and I don't really think it's something that most people are thinking about, but in the here and now, Frank still sees Deadpool as someone who betrayed him and his people, so he doesn't believe that Wade should be here, and he's not the only monster here who feels that way. So of course Deadpool, he doesn't pay much attention to this, and he goes on to tell him that he's here on business. And when he makes his way to Michael Morbius, Deadpool's like, how you been? And more importantly, how's our mutual friend, who as it turns out, just happens to be James Hudson Jr. from Earth 1610, the son of Wolverine. And I gotta tell you, it's a shame how Marvel has swept this guy under the rug for the past 6-something years, man. Cause they could have brought him back for the Krakoa era, they could have brought him back for King in Black, but no, after X-Men Blue, this dude was just MIA. And at this point, we're more or less able to piece together why he's been gone. Cause when he left, he just had his heart broken by the time displaced younger Jean Grey, and as it would seem, he just drifted and eventually ended up here, since Jimmy practically considers himself to be a monster. But the way Deadpool sees it, this is precisely the monster that they need to have a chance in this fight against the zombiotes. And while they're here, it's not too long before they get the chance to find out, because just moments later, the zombiotes make their way to the Monster Metropolis, and they start infecting the monsters. So as you might imagine, for Frank, in addition to any other monsters who feel like Deadpool's already a traitor, this has now just made the situation worse. Because to them, it's like Deadpool has just brought his enemies to their home, so it's only seen as just an insult to injury. But as Frank is telling Deadpool that this is his fault, Andy tells them that they need to fight now and point fingers later. So Deadpool tells Jimmy to bring out Poison and show these zombiotes what he's got. And as far as a little backstory for this whole Poison situation with Jimmy, this is something that's been around since Venomized issues 3 and 4, during the Poison Hive invasion, where at the time Jimmy had a symbiote bond to him, which had this purple and blue color scheme that made him look like a wild berry Pop-Tart that I'm still mad about to this day. But this was changed later on when Jimmy was consumed by one of the poison, which at the least made a color scheme correction. But after this, when the time-displaced Jean killed the Poison Queen, this sent a shockwave to all the poisons in her hive, causing them to collapse in on themselves. But because Jimmy has a resistance to telepathy, just like his father, his poison survived this attack, making his one of the few that remained. And after the conclusion of Venomized, the continuation of this was picked up within X-Men Blue, where we saw James Hudson Jr. return, and in Cult of Carnage, where Cletus's corpse was recovered and he came back from the dead. But in Jimmy's case, later on when he came back in X-Men Blue, between issues 29, 30, and 36, it was here where we started to explore the effects that had taken place with him still having one of the poison bonded to him, which for the most part had to do with him seeing flashbacks of things that had taken place on his home world, in addition to bits and pieces of moments from Venomized. But one of the last things that was left up in the air, as far as what was going on with Jimmy, it had to do with something he told Jean, back when her and the others tried to track down Jimmy to help him out, because it was at this time when he told her that Jimmy Hudson is dead. And really at this point in time, Jean looked into Jimmy's mind, and she saw where the heroes were killed in another reality, on a world that the poisons had conquered. But for Jimmy, he couldn't tell the difference between the poison's memories from another world and his own memories from his home world in the main Marvel universe that he's in now. So leading all the way up to the present moment, Jimmy's mind has been a mess, and it still is now. And it won't be long before that becomes a problem, now that he's gone full poison again. But at first when he joins the fight, it's kind of funny how Andy looks over there like, hey, I know that guy. So Deadpool gives her this quick explanation on who Jimmy is, and because of that, she has questions like, what's he doing here? How'd you find him? And how do you even know all this? So Deadpool just tells her to focus on the invasion that's happening now, because as it stands, they have zombiotes to kill. So from here, Andy tells Wade that she can use her anti-venom to purge some of the monsters. So Wade's like, go for it. Matter of fact, start with the big guy, referring to Man-Thing. But when Andy goes to purge Man-Thing, she burns at the Man-Thing's touch. And I mean, that's pretty much to be expected, because whoever knows fear at any level, they're gonna burn at the Man-Thing's touch. And Andy's no different. But as it turns out, this worked. But through the course of this fight between the monsters and the zombiotes who are invading, the number of monsters expressing their anger at Deadpool, it's grown exponentially. So even after they manage to get things under control, as soon as they're done, Frank and the others, they want Deadpool to leave. But Deadpool just tells them, like, not so fast, we're not done, because there's more people we need to save topside. So for a moment here, Frank is just like, well, the surface dwellers, they don't care about us, so we don't care about them. But Deadpool just lets him and the others know, like, yeah, of course the surface dwellers fear you, but they need you now. And besides, once the zombiotes take over the topside world, they're just gonna come back after you're home next. And really, it just makes for this moment where all the monsters come together and they head topside to take the fight to the zombiotes, while saving whatever people they can. And when they do, there are humans who notice this and express their appreciation to the monsters who came out of the shadows to help them out. And it kind of makes for a very heartwarming moment. But that doesn't last too long, because before you know it, Jimmy starts to get overwhelmed, which from there takes him into a berserker rage. So given the fact that he already wasn't that stable, this then causes him to just fly off the rails. And it's not even the case where the zombiotes are able to bite through his armor and possess him or anything like that. This is all him, his poison and his mixed up memories. Cause it's here where we see him say, the zombiotes consume the dead, use them as hosts, and they want me. Because they know what I am. They know I am already dead. Which again just goes back to the memories that Jimmy has that are a combination of his own and the memories that have come from his poison. Because Jimmy truly believes that he's already died. And I mean, really at this point, he's been gone for so long that I wouldn't be surprised if Marvel was like, you know what? He was dead. Just like Cletus Cassidy. But we'll have to wait and see if that happens. So for the time being, I'm just going off what's already established. But because Jimmy starts losing it here with his memories getting mixed up again, this causes him to attack the monsters in addition to the zombiotes, which right away has Andy like, yo, we need to do something about him. Hey, get your mans. Because if Jimmy's willing to go from fighting the zombiotes to attacking the monsters, who's to say he won't go after civilians next? So the first thing Deadpool could think of is to get Princess to go after him. So right away, Princess hops to it. But unfortunately, Princess just isn't enough to keep up with berserker raged poison Jimmy. So immediately Deadpool rushes in for what appears to be a moment where he gets to hear Princess's last few words. But in a twist of events, Princess bonds to Deadpool, and together they become Princess Deadpool. And I mean, they went through a whole list of names, like Deadpool by Night, Crap Wolf, but after going through the options, they land on Princess Deadpool, which feels like the right choice. It's kind of low-hanging fruit if you ask me. Alright, so for Venom War Carnage issues 2 and 3, this gives us the conclusion to the investigating that Carnage has been doing to learn as much as he could about the K chemical, with it recently being the one thing to nearly kill Carnage, which is a feeling Carnage hasn't had in a long time, because now that he's reached God levels of power, sure there's been moments where Carnage has felt pain, but nothing has brought him as close to death as the K chemical. But like we saw, this investigation led Carnage right to the doorstep of Finn Taylor, an Alchemax employee who got a ridiculous raise after miraculously discovering a mysterious substance that makes symbiote strains vulnerable to destruction, almost as if someone just handed it to him. So to find out more, Carnage ended up taking Finn's body and literally wearing him as a disguise in order to get full access to the K program so he can learn everything there is to know about it. Because again, as powerful as Carnage is, this mysterious K chemical, it's the one thing that can eventually blindside him and take him out. So he wants to make sure that he knows what this is, as well as the different ways it can be used, so he's not caught off guard and actually killed by it later on. But nonetheless, as Carnage makes his way into the lab, looking as normal as any creature wearing a human skin, as soon as he arrives, he's greeted by Dr. Freck, where in his case, we know how things play out for him after what we saw in the Venom War Venomized tie-ins, because this is just another one of those events where things don't come out in the order they happened in. So for that reason, just think of Venom War Carnage as one big flashback before issues 4 and 5. But nonetheless, at this point in time, Dr. Freck has come for an inspection because they need something marketable for the auction next week. And so the way this was supposed to play out Finn Taylor, who's currently Carnage's meat puppet, he was supposed to do this presentation for Dr. Freck, but now with Carnage having taken over his body and his memories, he's still able to do this presentation as if he was Finn, because Finn rehearsed his lines a number of times before this, so now Carnage knows those words as his own. But even with that being the case, even though he knows the presentation, for Carnage, seeing this is a whole nother story. So as they get started, one of the first things that's shown to Dr. Freck is a demonstration proving that the K program has been able to successfully get a symbiote to bond with a host of their choosing without hesitation. And even though Carnage is explaining this through Finn, it's shocking for him to see as well. And mind you, this whole time inside of Finn, who's still alive, there's also this conversation between Carnage and Cletus Cassidy that's taking place here as well, because Cletus is a little curious too, though not nearly as much as Carnage. But as his presentation continues, Dr. Freck expresses that he'd much rather have male samples, something more soldier-like for the auction. So next, he shows Dr. Freck K ammunition, which can be made for and shot by any ordinary high-caliber weapon. So to demonstrate, he just one-shots the subject, who is just now successfully bonded to a symbiote. And Dr. Freck is impressed. But on the other hand, Cletus, he's just like, hey, we've seen enough, why don't we just kill everybody here? But Carnage, he doesn't want to stop now, he wants this to continue, because he wants to see more. So after this, the next demonstration they go to is inoculation. And mind you, these demonstrations fall right in line with what Liz Allen found when she discovered the secret of the K program, like we saw in Carnage Volume 4. Cause back when Flash went to her about the whole conspiracy of Carnage coming back, which was true, Liz later discovered that Alchemax was funding a secret R&D project that she had no access to from her computer, which was definitely a red flag with her being the CEO. So after following the paper trail, Liz found one of these secret labs filled with top secret information as well as a prototype weapon. But when she went back to Flash's apartment to share with him what she found, this only led Liz right into the middle of a fight between Carnage and Flash. But in all of this, Liz ended up discovering that the K program started as a symbiote R&D project that Alchemax shut down years ago. And as of recently, the theoretical applications that the program was experimenting with, it included the new K chemical, synthetic hives, mind control, and possible human inoculation, to where now all of which are being shown in this demonstration. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that back up because we covered when Liz discovered all this. So fast forward to now in Venom War with us actually seeing it, this is now like the confirmation for everything that Liz saw. So next, for the inoculation demonstration, they view a test subject who's been treated to be immune to symbiotes by way of an injection that only takes 4 hours to work. And so they demonstrate this by releasing a symbiote in the room with this guy that is desperate for a host, but when it gets close to him, it refuses to bond with him, proving that the vaccine works as intended. And even though this vaccine is most effective when injected, they've also found it to be useful in an aerosol version that's harmless to humans but lethal to symbiotes, and even more effective in a liquid version, which they currently have in their sprinkler system. So after hearing this, Dr. Freck asked about the downsides, which as of right now is mainly two things, with the first being the cost, because at this stage it's very expensive to reproduce these demonstrations, and the second thing is most of this is relatively untested on grown or mature symbiotes, so as it stands it's unproven if any of this will work on a symbiote that's much older and more powerful. So for the next demonstration, they showed Dr. Freck their progress on the synthetic hive, which at this point is being touted as the main event, while the other demonstrations from before are considered to be your high-cost first line of defense. So to show this off, they have one of their employees wearing this headpiece designed to make her the hive leader. So for the purpose of the demonstration, she shoots at a dummy, while the other symbiotes who are bonded to corpses, they follow behind her, though they're only shooting blanks. But as this is happening, the symbiotes, they don't only show that they can follow orders, but they also demonstrate that they can understand intention. And as Cletus and Carnage are seeing this, they notice that something's off, something's missing, because this isn't something that humans could achieve without help. And they quickly find out that it's not working as well as it seems when the human hive leader loses her lunch, and she shoots the other scientists in the room, as a result of the hive taking control of her. And this immediately causes things to escalate, because right away Dr. Freck is just yelling code red, and he's yelling at Finn to flush the cage, but Dr. Freck ain't sticking around to see what happens next. But But after that, when this Hive and the scientists come out of the room, they approach Carnage because they see right through his disguise. And even though it seems like they're attacking Empyre, because the Hive gets this scientist to shoot off his hand, Carnage senses a connection to them, and he realizes they're just curious and they're testing him. But this gets interrupted when security comes through, and they attempt to save Finn, but before they know it, they're just quickly overwhelmed. And I want to point out that right now, Cletus is trying to tell Carnage they need to go. But Carnage tells him no, and it's not only because he wants to see what these symbiotes are going to do, but it's also because Carnage feels a connection to them. He feels their panic and their pain as if it's his own. So when the scientist catches a headshot, Carnage feels that too. So when they activate the sprinklers, which have the potent version of the symbiote killing vaccine in it, Carnage feels the death of these symbiotes like it's his own. And when it gets under Finn's skin, it hits Carnage, giving Finn the opportunity to regain control just for a moment and tell the guards Carnage is in him. Though unfortunately, those would be Finn's last words. So now that Carnage's cover is blown, he just lets loose and tears into these guys. And it's a bloodbath. But to Carnage's surprise, this baptism is ended quite abruptly when he's stabbed through the back by Meridius. And I gotta say, with how this happens, it's supposed to be another big reveal kind of moment. Because throughout Carnage Volume 4, as well as Venom War Carnage, we've been getting narration from Meridius. So with Meridius, who's been watching Carnage, steps in here because Carnage is about to win, it's supposed to feel like this moment where it's like, oh wow, there he is. But it just doesn't manage to capture that feeling. And if you ask me, the reason why, it's mainly because of the structure of Venom War. Because since these issues aren't released in order, we already know there's an encounter coming after this encounter. So for that reason, the suspense of what comes next, it's completely gone. But at this time, when Carnage seeing Meridius here, it throws him off, because he thought he killed Meridius in the garden. So Meridius tells him no, that just ripped him to pieces and sent him back to the beginning of time. And I mean, really, it's Eddie who sent Meridius to the beginning of time, but we're splitting hairs at this point. So next, Carnage is just like, okay, didn't kill you the first time, so practice makes perfect. And he goes to attack Meridius. But with Carnage going after Meridius here, it's more so the case of him not knowing what to do. And since he doesn't know what to do, he just resorts to doing what he always does. And on the other hand with Meridius, of course, he's fighting back because he just wants to protect his investment. And when it comes to Cletus Cassidy, right now he's just quiet. But he's gonna have plenty to say later, we'll get to that. But right now with Carnage doing most of the talking, Carnage lets Meridius know if the roles were reversed and Carnage was here from the beginning of time, he wouldn't be hiding, he'd run it. But the thing is, Meridius, he knows Carnage better than that. Because the truth is, Carnage would just destroy it. So he just rips off Carnage's head and tells him stop fighting so they can talk. And he tells Carnage, I know you have questions, I will answer, if you will, but calm down for a moment. So Carnage asks him directly, it was you, the weapons, all the K-chemical nonsense? And Meridius confirms that it was, because he'd been planning this from the beginning of time. Because after Carnage destroyed Meridius's garden in the far future, which threw Meridius along with the different Eddies into the time stream. After that, when Eddie sent Meridius back to the beginning of time, this is what started Meridius on the path of doing something completely different. Which is why after that happened, I started referring to Meridius as Meridius 2.0, because his end goal is different from what it was before. And now that he's able to have a conversation with Carnage, it's here where he explains this to him, because he goes on to say, indeed, I have been waiting, planning since the beginning of time. I have lain dormant through most of it. For the first millennium, I made sure not to disturb the past. But some years ago, I realized that the future I was working for could not come to be without intervention. I met a man from the future, but he was not from my future. It was not the Eden I had so meticulously planned. I was curious. And this man, he had a broken husk of a symbiote. So I took his mind, and in it, I saw the destruction of everything. And as he's explaining this, we can see that this man from the future, he's the old man formerly known as Dylan. But Meridius goes on to say, I saw his future, the future. I saw the world lifeless and cold. I saw the last of humanity fight their futile fight. And I saw their enemy, half machines, half symbiotes, stunning things. And then I felt it, the poison they used to kill their enemy. Agony like nothing I've ever experienced before or after. You know the pain I speak of, do you not? To where then Carnage's little head just looks up at Meridius and says, I know it. So Meridius continues, and he goes on to tell Carnage, I was hurt, I was humbled, but in my disgrace, I saw the potential. The poison coursing through me was like nothing I had seen on Earth before. But now, I had it. The old fool thought it would kill me. Instead, he gave me a gift. I could harness it. He gave me the means to create this. As he shows Carnage a vial containing the K chemical, which now has Carnage realizing this is where the K project truly began. So Meridius goes on to say, is that what they call it? The humans? How pedestrian. Involving them was an unfortunate necessity. Think of it as Clintar life essence, deadly, or life-giving, black, or white. But it has many potential applications. As you've seen, they came up with most of them. It is funny. One would think it would bother them, the humans. One would think once they saw the plan, once they saw the potential for enslavement and destruction of free will, one would think they would refuse. But they saw a product line, an investment opportunity. I had a sales pitch ready, but they did not need it. Humanity will happily contribute to their own obsolescence, as long as they make some money in the process. But as Carnage follows Meridius deeper into this new garden, it's here where Cletus breaks his silence, and he tells Carnage if there's a god in this garden, it's not you. He is playing with you, playing you. We need to get out of here. He wants something from you. Can't you tell? And Cletus is absolutely right, because next Meridius hands Carnage the K chemical, and he tells Carnage that he's here because he has a purpose, because just like Meridius, Carnage believes he can change the world. So in the here and now, this is Meridius trying to get Carnage on his side, because he wants Carnage to join him and kill Eddie Brock. But the way Meridius is wording this, it's as if Carnage has already agreed and they're moving on to the next step, because now Meridius is asking Carnage how he's gonna go about killing Eddie. But Carnage is just like, whoa, slow your roll, I didn't agree to nothing. And this causes the tension to quickly build from here, because now Meridius is more or less like, I didn't bring you in this far to let you just walk away. There's a war coming, and I need to know whose side you're on. So Carnage just looks him right in the face and says, mine, which of course was not the answer Meridius was looking for. So he just punches right into Carnage as a way of going for the answer himself, because he wants to see what Carnage has planned for Eddie and how he's planned to kill him. But Carnage is able to pull away and smack Meridius while telling him, get out of my head. I am not some simpering symbiote you can control at will. I am Carnage. So Meridius, he more or less agrees, because he knows he can't control Carnage or force him to do what he wants. So he more or less tells him like, hey, I can't make you do what I want you to do, but don't think I can't kill you. Just before he grabs Carnage by the neck and dunks him into the K chemical. And it burns Carnage like crazy, but it's not a pain that he's unfamiliar with. And the K chemical is not something that Carnage has grown fully immune to yet. So if he's in here long enough, it could kill him. So as Meridius is holding Carnage down in here, and I mean, this is a full body baptism we're talking about. But as he's holding him down, Meridius asks, have you had enough? Or will your pride cost you your life? And so it's here where Carnage more or less gives in, because it's here where he tells Meridius how he plans to kill Eddie, as he rises up with the Necro Spear and puts it right in Meridius' chest. And he tells Meridius, this is how you kill an Eddie. Remember this, Meridius. I let you live. And this whole time, Cletus is trying to tell Carnage to kill him. But Carnage just walks away. So Meridius, he's telling Carnage to stay, and if he does, he'll give Carnage what he wants. But Carnage continues to leave while saying, you do not know what I want, Meridius. Only for Meridius to say, yes, I do. And that sticks with Carnage even after he leaves. And the next thing we see later on is a conversation between Cletus and Carnage, where Cletus is asking Carnage, why didn't you kill Meridius? And he tells Carnage that he wished he would just let all of this go, between the war and all this K chemical nonsense, because Cletus just wants things to go back to how they were. But the way that Carnage sees it, they can't avoid this war that's coming. And at the end of the day, Cletus, he sees where this could potentially take them. But he just doesn't think that's any fun, because Cletus sees the world as it is, as their garden, and he doesn't want that to change. But as they're walking and talking, there's a kind of wild moment here, because when Cletus sees this couple in the alley getting ready to make macaroni and cheese noises, Cletus just takes the both of them out as a way of showing Carnage what he means with Cletus not wanting things to change. So again, Carnage tells Cletus that he does, and this causes Cletus to step out of the symbiote. So of course Carnage reminds him that he made Cletus. He constructed this body and put Cletus' mind in it, and this body can't survive without the Carnage symbiote. So when Cletus steps out, Carnage is expecting him to just crumple down, but he doesn't. And in response to Carnage saying, you need me, Cletus just looks back and he's like, are you sure? You need me more than I need you, Carnage. cause now Cletus Cassidy is as much of a human as he ever was. So from here he just walks away while telling Carnage, "Find me when you're done playing God," which from here just leaves the Carnage symbiote without Cletus once again, as the Carnage symbiote looks down at the gift he was given by Meridius, which now after all that's happened, it begs the question of how much stronger is Carnage against the K-Chemical now? And not just that, but did they just give Meridius a higher tolerance against the Necrospear? Because if that's the case, they literally just gave each other an upgrade. But we'll find out more pretty soon. Alright, so for this one, we pick up from the events of Venom War issue 3, where like we saw, Dr. Doom activated the Flexo symbiote to attack Eddie Brock, only to then have Kang send the Red Goblin after Flexo. Cause like we talked about before, Venom War has a number of different rivalries who are going head to head, which started with Eddie versus Dylan. But underneath the surface, the rivalry between Kang and Doom has just been waiting for this moment, with Doom controlling Flexo to seize the opportunity to go after Eddie Brock, and Kang using the Red Goblin to go after Flexo. And it's pretty crazy how all of this even came together, with Doom traveling back to 1942 to set up Flexo as a sleeper agent in Venom's hive as a counter move against Kang, who already had a plan in place when he built the Rascal symbiote derived from Bedlam and planted it in the 21st century so that Dylan would give it to Normie. And there's more factors that play into this that we've covered on the Venom playlist, linked down in the description, but all you really need to know for what's happening in the here and now is that Doom and Kang both had their own individual plans as far as how they wanted to handle Venom War and what they wanted out of it. So as expected, that just led to each of them believing that the other one was just in the way, so they each planned their contingencies to handle the other. And it's here where we see that play out, because just after Red Goblin snatched Dylan out of Flexo, he then pulled Flexo out of Grand Garden Arena to continue their fight outside. And mind you, this whole time with Normie inside of the Rascal symbiote as the Red Goblin, he has lost all control once his symbiote is activated by Kang. So to most people on the outside looking in, this would appear to only be a fight between two symbiotes, when the truth is, this is actually a chrono-manipulative chess match between Dr. Doom and Kang the Conqueror, where their preparations all come crashing into this moment. So to compete in this chrono-manipulative chess match, they both bring their A-game, and we take a look at how they do on both ends, starting with Doom, because the next thing we do is head over to Castle Doom, where we take a look at his 15th generation scheme bots, who are essentially cognitively elite Doom bots that have all been programmed with Doom's intellect to run a cybernetic emulation of multiple Dooms, brainstorming ideas and challenging one another. So it's practically Doom GPT, set to run day and night without end. But among this brainstorming, one of the scheme bots suggests that they use the neural swapping techniques that Doom had taken from the Ovoids, because Flexo's current hypnotic imprinting could be expanded, repurposed, and weaponized as a way to use the Ovoid's mental martial arts against that preening Chrono Dandy, who of course is referring to Kang. So over time, this idea is challenged by other scheme bots, it's ruthlessly critiqued, dissected, and refined to where once they come to a conclusion, they present it to Doom at the weekly pitch meeting. And when they do, they bring him the idea of weaponizing the Ovoids' art of cognitive commutation. And the Ovoids, they're a group of aliens from another galaxy, whose science and culture were a million years ahead of Earth's. And back in Fantastic Four issue 10, when Doom told the story of his return, he explained how when he was being carried into space on a speeding meteor, the Ovoids saved him. And though his initial reaction was to get the strap, they proved to Doom that they were harmless by lifting insanely heavy objects with their mind. So right away, you know Doom was like, I gotta steal these powers, learn their secrets. But what Doom found more impressive than their telekinetic ability had turned out to be their solution to mortality, because the Ovoids had figured out how to switch their minds into another body. And for them, it was a whole process where when one of them was dying, they would just take him to the extra body chamber and put that mind into a younger, new body, which was something Doom initially used to swap bodies with Reed Richards. So after suggesting to weaponize the cognitive commutation, the scheme bots also let Doom know that Flexo's crude intellect would require even more extensive magic-enhanced hypnosis, since Flexo's not the sharpest tool in the shed. So after hearing this, Doom agrees, to where from here, next we go over to Kang, who we find at the Chronopolis, and he goes on to explain here how periodically every Kang must pause his conquering for perhaps a second or two, and then weave himself into a repeating time loop within which he can spend subjective years, decades, or centuries. while crafting thousandfold, endlessly multifaceted hyper plans of mind-boggling complexity for his unlooped Kang self later use. And it's in this chronopolis or time loop where Kang is dubbed himself He Who Schemes. And he goes on to say he often finds himself disappointed by the lackluster ham-fisted execution of his sophisticated chrono schemes. So for that reason, he's kept the most treasured and sublime of his strategic masterworks entirely to himself, where among those masterworks, he's developed weaponized time loops. So what Kang ends up doing next is using the Fantastic Four as chrono-looped weapons by way of soliciting their help as they traveled through time on what was just another one of their adventures, using Rosebud 2. And Kang just phrases it in a way where it's like he can't counter Doom's chrono scheme directly, and the Fantastic Four are the only ones who could stop him. So he ends up sending them to 1942, which is where Doom planted his mind control in Flexo. Though this time around we see Doom hypnotically encoding Flexo with the weaponized version of the Ovoid's mind-switching neuro-jujitsu techniques, only to suddenly be bombarded by the Fantastic Four. And this choice was deliberate from Kang, because he knows how much Doom hates Reed Richards. But no matter how many times Doom would try to escape and attempt the Ovoid lore imprinting on Flexo at a later date, he would constantly find himself, or in what in this case is actually a Doombot, intercepted by the Fantastic Four time and time again, which is mainly because of Reed's chrono tracking gear in the time sled, which would allow them to find this Doombot every time. And because this is a time loop, Kang could have this go on indefinitely, or for however long Doom could endure. So with this working in Kang's favor, he believes that he's secure the win, while in the case of Doom, neither him or his overclocked scheme bots can come up with a way to work around it. But the wild card that ends up changing everything, it happens towards the end of one of these loops, when Sue notices that something's wrong with Reed, and she asks him to tell her what it is. And as it turns out at this point, Reed has realized that Kang has had them stuck in a 5-minute time loop, and Reed suspects that he's the first one to figure this out among them, because he's experienced considerably more time travel than the others. And on top of that, he's also noticed this Kang that they're dealing with, he's too arrogant and undiscerning, which is why he hasn't realized that Reed is fully chrono aware. And when Sue asked Reed how many times has he told them this before, he's like roughly a few hundred, and it's just like, man, that's a lot of time loops. But from there he goes on to tell them that Kang's hurried explanation of the Flexo-related Doom scheme, it keeps changing slightly with repetition, which is possibly because Kang is trying to keep himself entertained after repeatedly manipulating them each time. So as a solution, Reed tells them during one of their next loops, they need to find out exactly what Doom is planning by using the time sled to get to the right source. So that's precisely what they do. But when they arrive at Castle Doom, the scheme bots are just going crazy at the sight of the Fantastic Four. So what Reed does next, it almost feels like he's bringing the Ovoid situation full circle. Because when they get there, Reed elastically manipulates his vocal cords to sound like Dr. Doom. And the scheme bots go for it, which to me just feels like a really fitting twist, since Dr. Doom is bringing back a method that he used to switch bodies and impersonate Reed. So what Reed ends up doing here while using the voice of Doom is tell the scheme bots to run the plan by him one more time. So they end up telling Reed all the details, so the next time they go into the loop, they'll have more information to move accordingly, and we're not left in suspense for too long before we find out what Reed has planned. But on the chrono chessboard, so to speak, as it stands right now, Normie is beating Flexo as a byproduct of Kang currently winning against Doom. But the next time we see Kang approach the Fantastic Four at the start of a time loop, when he shows up, they're booing him, and Reed's calling him a lesser Kang variant. Because within the last 100-odd time loops, Reed's managed to upgrade the time sled's chrono tracking gear to backtrace He Who Schemes to his home time loop in the Chronopolis. And as soon as they get there, Reed gives Ben and Johnny the signal to go after Kang, or He Who Schemes as he would call himself. But the first thing he does when Ben throws a punch is place Ben in the middle of multiple time loops, which has him just catching his own punch from every angle, which once again is just a byproduct of the whole weaponized time loop thing. But Kang doesn't just do this to Ben, he lets Johnny catch some of it too. But it isn't too long before he notices that this was all a distraction, because while Kang was fighting Johnny and Ben, they were just buying time so that Reed could crack the time loop control panel, while Sue covers him in her defensive force field. So Kang puts Sue's shields to the test by using Johnny's initial attack against her, in the form of another weaponized time loop. And I'll tell you, man, that this guy ain't the king of spamming the same attack. I don't know who is. But Kang doesn't believe that Reed has any sort of chance at circumventing his control-ware security. But Reed ends up getting in by elastically reconfiguring his brain tissue in order to convincingly match a generic Kang neurosignature, which effectively turns he who schemes into he who can't believe this shit, because he doesn't even know how Reed would have had the time to pull this off outside of his surveillance. So Reed tells him that he had enough time to visit Kang's home chrono loop on several thousand occasions to develop this brute force neurohack, and he was able to do this by just stealing seconds from the 5-minute chrono prison loop, since Kang was too arrogant to even notice when Reed became fully chrono aware. And it's funny how Reed even admits here that this was definitely more difficult than faking Doom's voice print. So following this, next, Reed sends Kang to the scheme bots, and he places them in a 5-second time loop so they can just confront each other over and over again. And much like Reed, eventually he who schemes will realize that he's in a loop and he will find a way out. But with him being preoccupied indefinitely, this leaves Doom free to interact with Flexo in 1942, with the addition of the Mind Lord, the Ovoids. So now, just as the scheme bots originally planned, Flexo will be able to use the Ovoid's repurposed mental martial arts to purge the Rascal symbiote of Kang's influence. And when we jump back to Normie, Rascal, and Flexo, we see that the Rascal symbiote is back to normal. He doesn't even know who Kang is, but in the case of Flexo, he does remember Metalface, aka Doom. But when Normie asks who Metalface is, Flexo just tells him it's a long story, which just has me thinking if Flexo will be using his new ability at some point in the future. And as far as the Fantastic Four, aside from Ben and Johnny being banged up, they end up just leaving Kang in this 5-second time loop because, again, it's one of those things that he who schemes will eventually figure out. And after that, they just make their way back into the time stream, which puts them right back where they started, in a sense, as if this was just another one of the Fantastic Four's adventures. Alright, so coming back, we continue in Grand Garden Arena, where at this point, Peter's already seen the future where he becomes the King in Black, and how that led to a tragic series of events for, really, the entire universe, which included both MJ as well as their daughter, May Parker. So to save them and the future, Peter had to let go of the Venom symbiote, so he did. And recently, with him just getting the call from Paul, MJ's current boyfriend, Peter now knows that MJ went dark fighting the Arachnio, so he's got to get out of here to save her, because that doesn't play out well for her down the line either. But in the here and now with Peter trying to shake Bedlam, he's not really able to until Dylan and Eddie step in, who at this point, both father and son have bonded with the Venom symbiote. And we find out here, by way of the symbiote, this bond between the three of them, it syncs them all together. So now there's no secrets between them, and now as the symbiote would describe, they're finally a perfect family. And I mean, it's great that Eddie and Dylan are able to team up here, but it's like, man, the Venom symbiote's just gonna call the three of them a perfect family. And it's like, never mind the other kids, or grandkids of the Venom symbiote for that matter. But in the case of Bedlam, who's considered to be the raged drunk uncle in this analogy, in his case, that makes sense. So at this point where they gotta figure out what to do with him, Dylan on one hand has no problem with getting rid of Bedlam, so Dylan just takes his head clean off, which in this moment effectively separates Bedlam from the King in Black's hive, since that's Dylan's power as Codex. But on the other hand, Eddie doesn't want to kill Bedlam because they've been through a lot together. And I think part of that also has to do with Bedlam being a version of Eddie Brock as well. And the Venom symbiote doesn't want to get rid of Bedlam either. So it's 2 votes against 1 so far. But it's not too long before they really don't have a choice, as Bedlam's hit with anti-venom, and they're met by the arrival of Flash Thompson, who just finishes Bedlam without hesitation. And I'm not gonna front, if I was Eddie, I'd have been looking at Flash like, oh man, that's how you feel? But also with Flash coming here, he's making his way over from the Venom War Venomous tie-ins, where he teamed up with Widow and Liz Allen, though most of his stuff with Liz happened in the Carnage series. And I got our coverage linked below for you guys. But leading up to this, with Flash having had his experience with the symbiotes, this also led to him learning that he could save people using anti-venom punches. But soon after, he discovered that this brutal method wasn't really necessary, when Liz taught him that all he really needed to do was make contact and concentrate. But as soon as Flash gets to the arena, Peter, he's gotta go. And when Peter leaves, Flash is like, oh man, I probably should have warned him about the symbiotes out there. Cause when Flash left Liz and Widow, it was getting crazy. And when Flash says this, everyone else here is like, zombie oats? And Eddie's just like, back up, Flash, what are zombie oats? And before Flash can even answer that question, the answer comes crashing into the arena. And Flash is just like, those are zombie oats. And because they're all forced to fight off these zombie oats, without Flash really getting the opportunity to tell Eddie and Dylan what they are, it's here where the Venom symbiote fills them in about the zombie oats history, starting with Lee Price. Because again, with Eddie and Dylan being in sync with one another through the Venom symbiote, it's able to get them both up to speed in a matter of seconds. So Eddie fills in Flash about parts of it along the way. But again, because this bond is showing both Eddie and Dylan everything, Dylan now knows what Meridius told them about the absent throne, which not only ties Meridius to everything Dylan had been through, since Eddie was killed, leaving Dylan on his own, on the run, and hunted. So this now has Dylan like, okay, the absent throne's the one who did all this, and Meridius is the absent throne. But on top of that, Meridius is Eddie. So now it has Dylan looking at this Eddie sideways, almost as if he's the one who put Dylan through all of this. And next we head back over to Alchemax HQ with Carnage and Meridius, where now with Meridius seeing that the Venom symbiotes learned to bond with two hosts, which is what he was pushing it towards, he says it's imperative that he gets it back now. But with Flash stepping in as a wild card, using his anti-venom against the zombiotes, this creates a complication. So Carnage tells Meridius perhaps he could use a wild card of his own. So he offers Meridius the Necro Spear, but Meridius just turns it down, and he tells Carnage, nice try, I'm not that desperate, only for Carnage to tell him, not yet. Meanwhile, back at the arena, the bond between Dylan, Eddie, and Venom, it's fracturing. And much of that has to do with what Dylan's just learned about Eddie and Meridius. That's pulling Dylan in one direction, with Eddie's guilt pulling him in another. And the Venom symbiote is just stuck in between. And during this zombiote attack, Dylan, he gets ready to cut through these announcers who were taken by zombiotes not long ago, only for Flash to jump in and stop them. Because as living hosts, these guys can still be saved. And when Eddie and Toxin jump in to try and round these guys up so Flash can cure them, one of these guys catches Toxin with the reversal, which is kind of funny given the whole wrestling thing. But Dylan notices that this creates a bit of a problem, because also with Flash mentioning that these zombiotes are a lot tougher with human hosts and fast, this creates a problem where Flash can't get a clean shot, and they don't want Flash hitting the wrong person with his anti-venom. So at this point, with the Venom symbiote having explained everything to Dylan and Eddie about Lee Price being the first zombiote and how Meridius took Lee Price and used him as a template to create these zombiotes, where in addition to that, Meridius used a version of the K chemical to make it so that these zombiotes could only be controlled by him. So right here, Dylan's just like, wait, Dad is Meridius. And so right here, Eddie just starts apologizing and telling Dylan, I'm sorry for everything I did to make him possible, but he's just a walking what if. I'm not him, I'm not going to be him. I have literally moved heaven and earth not to become that monster. But Dylan just stops him right there like, yeah, whatever, I get it. But right here, Dylan's trying to let Eddie know that they could use the idea of Eddie being Meridius, since he's the one who can control the zombiotes. So right here through their bond, Dylan sends Eddie an idea. And the Venom symbiote gets it too, which is why it leaves Eddie for a moment here. And really, Dylan's idea here is for Eddie to use what he can control to take on these zombiotes. So next, Eddie tells Flash, I'm gonna need you to trust me. So Flash tells him, I came here to finish this, Eddie. If it stops the zombiotes, do it. So Eddie tells him, fair warning then, this is gonna hurt. And it's right here where Eddie Brock, the symbiote bender, the King in Black, he takes control of Flash's anti-venom symbiote, which not only makes sense because Eddie's the King in Black, but also because the original anti-venom was formed from the symbiote's residue in Eddie's white blood cells. So because of this, anti-venoms are fundamentally a part of Eddie's body. So as King in Black, what belongs to Eddie is under his control, symbiote or flesh. And this hits a little harder since Eddie came back as the human symbiote back in Venom Legacy issue 220, because it was there where he figured out how to regenerate from just a pile of bones, when he traveled through time into his human remains, much like how we saw Meridius travel through time into symbiote matter. So taking that idea and adding it to the fact that antivenoms are fundamentally a part of Eddie's body, that's insane. And if you need to learn more about the whole human symbiote thing, I have a link in the description for that video. But right here where Eddie calls the anti-venom symbiote to himself, since the symbiote is carrying the resurrected soul of Flash Thompson as a result of the conclusion of King in Black, Eddie makes Flash a new body inside of this cocoon. where the anti-Venom really just uses Flash's self-image to print him out a whole new body. So Flash is actually back, he's human now, and he's alive. But right here, Eddie, he's only getting started, cause from here, with the symbiotes still under the King in Black's rule, Eddie sends out a psychic healing wave to all of them, and this would have been dangerous to the Venom symbiote, Sleeper, and Toxin, if Dylan wasn't here. But because Dylan has the ability to separate symbiotes from the hive, he's able to protect them while Eddie does this. But this effectively gets rid of the symbiotes, freeing the living hosts who are trapped inside, while letting the dead ones finally rest. And Meridius does not like this one bit, cause he just looks at Carnage like, man, Brock's got the anti-venom and he's king blocking me with it. Given time, he'll free all the symbiotes, undo everything. And I'm just like, yo, king blocking. Like that should have been the title of a tie-in series right there. Venom War King Blocking. Y'all let me know what the subtitle will be in the comments below. Wait a minute, nah, don't do that. But at this time, Meridius has more or less come to the point where he's desperate enough now. So he takes Carnage up on his offer of using All Blood, the Necrospear. And Meridius compares this to as if he's making a deal with the devil here. And it's pretty twisted because as soon as Meridius takes All Blood, Eddie's connection to the symbiotes who are connected to Meridius, it gets corrupted to where suddenly these symbiotes who are dying, they start turning red. So right away, just off of instinct, Dylan knows that this is Carnage, so he tries to tell Eddie to fight this, but out of Eddie, Dylan hears the voice of Carnage saying, yes, fight, everybody. And this creates a really bad situation really fast, because if left unchecked, there's really no limit to how far Carnage could use this connection and expand his reach. And Venom even says here, if this corruption takes hold fully, it could end the universe. And with them running out of time, we see a light show up behind Dylan, revealing Old Man Dylan, or the old man formerly known as Dylan, who then says, I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. Just before we see Eddie stabbed through the back by Dylan. And I gotta say, this is setting up some things right now for later on, as far as where things are going for Eddie, and I'm really reserving my thoughts until we see more, but this is what sets us up heading into the conclusion, which I'm expecting to be a lot crazier. Alright, so this one picks up after Carnage destroyed the Garden of Meridius, which sent Meridius, Eddie, and the other versions of Eddie back into the time stream as a result of the garden being destroyed. And in Venom issue 35, we saw that this led to Meridius blaming Eddie, human symbiote Eddie. But at this point, the others who were following Meridius, they all turned on him, joined Eddie, and pushed Meridius out of the time stream, sending him back to the beginning of time as they traveled to the present day to start Venom War. So this time around, we follow Meridius, as we're told the world was beautiful in the beginning, but this is not his time, not yet. Besides, he thinks he can do better, so Meridius waits and sleeps. In his waking moments, he relives the history of men without interfering. He feels little as they build, burn, and kill each other over their imaginary differences, repeating the same mistakes generation after generation. They excuse it all with their ignorance. And there's a moment here where Meridius is passing by a guy who's saying, then Jesus said, forgive them for they know not what they do. As it goes on to say, but Meridius knows, they might not know what they do now, but they, referring to the humans, they will learn, and it will not stop them. And following this, we move further into the future, where at this point, Meridius has moved in next door to his parents. And there's even a moment here where we see Carl and Jamie Brock stopping by to welcome their new neighbor with a fresh apple pie. And it's funny because when he introduces himself, he tells them his real name. He's like, Edward. And his mom's like, Edward, that's a nice name. So there you have it. Eddie Brock was named after himself. And so following this, we head over to Jotunheim with Old Man Venom and Loki, where at this point, Old Man Venom, who's also future Dylan Brock, he's given up his name after making a deal with Chthon. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. But at this point, with him coming to Loki this far back in time, Loki doesn't even know what a symbiote is. So he asks, what are you? And they respond saying, we are Venom. So Loki's like, sure thing, buddy. But what Loki notices is that there is a mortal man on the inside. So he asks, what is the other thing? So Venom tells him, a symbiote. And Loki's just like, symbiote? That sounds like a parasite trying to remarket itself. So he sends Venom flying out of this little shack that they found him in. And so the old man, formerly known as Dylan, he tries to tell Venom that they need Loki, so take it easy here. But with Loki calling Venom the P word, he's not gonna let that fly. So it quickly turns into an instance where Old Man Dylan's try to mediate between Loki and Venom. Because when Venom tells Loki, "I am not a parasite," Loki's just like, that's exactly what a parasite would say, as he turns into a snowman and just appears behind them. But next, Loki asks, "What is that thing you are carrying?" There is something else in you, beyond the mortal, of course, referring to the metal alloy imbued with chaos magic. So again, with future Dylan, or Old Man Venom, and I say that because he's still referred to as both to kind of avoid confusion or anything like that, he lets Loki know that he'll tell him everything, but he needs Loki to stop attacking the symbiote because he needs the symbiote to stay alive. But if Loki keeps attacking it, they're gonna keep going back and forth and nothing's gonna get done. So with hearing this, Loki's like, that's what a parasite would make its host say. So Venom tells Dylan, he's not going to listen. Let us show him. Show him the alloy. Show him the power we carry. So as the real Loki tries to catch them slipping from behind, Venom brings out the Molten Man alloy that's been imbued with chaos magic, and it just shatters Loki's dagger. As we're told here, uncontrollable, it thunders around them. In the reflection of the metal alloy, they see universes long since dead. They see worlds through the eyes of Chthon, boundless powers and unending destruction. And as this is happening, he tells Loki, Dr. Stephen Strange said that it could not be forged in the light, and that you could help me, and that you would, for a piece of it. So from here, the God of Mischief wonders if the old man knows what he's carrying, if he truly understands the power he's giving away. So Loki tells him, you have a deal, old man, but he doesn't plan on letting him know what this alloy is truly capable of. And following this, when we go back to Meridius, at this point we see what is eventually him observing the life of young Eddie Brock after he lost his mother. And we're shown an example with another family in the park of how having a mother around could have possibly given Eddie a different childhood, because after Eddie lost his mother, his father Carl became very cold and unable to show love to his son. And with how this is set up, now Meridius was there to watch what is essentially his childhood, like when Eddie turned 9 and he found out that his mother died during childbirth, and how when Eddie was 11, he spent every afternoon studying in a futile attempt to impress his father. And at 13, when he stopped looking for his father to show up at his games, Meridius was there. And I'll admit, as this continued to go through the younger years of Eddie Brock, when I first read this I was thinking to myself, this has gotta be leading up to that accident. Because when Eddie was a teenager, he stole his dad's car to sneak out and get drunk with some friends, and when he tried to sneak back home, he ended up hitting one of the neighbor's kids who ran into the street and killing him. And there was this whole thing in Venom Volume 4 where Eddie's dad, Carl, wanted him to plead innocent, and Eddie didn't want to, and Carl later on went bankrupt trying to cover the whole thing up. But now with Meridius watching this happen, and keep in mind when this version of Eddie turned into Meridius, after going through the multiple stages, he no longer considered himself to be Eddie Brock, which is why throughout Venom War, when we see Carnage calling Meridius Eddie, Meridius hates it. So now with Meridius reliving some of these moments, it briefly causes him to ask himself if there's any part of Eddie Brock that remains in him now. And I'm not gonna front, this kinda has me wanting to see some sort of redemption for Meridius down the line. Like, I don't know, maybe he can become an old biker and protect Dylan at some point. Who knows? But following this, we jump back to Old Man Dylan and Loki, who've made their way to the forge at Nidav Lair, where he gives Loki the material to be forged with the shadows. And there's a moment here where Loki asks, how many does he need? So the old man tells him, as many as you can make. So from there, Loki's just like, you should rest, old man. This will take a while. So he lays down for some hours, figuring that these will be the last hours of his life, because when this is done, he'll be approaching the final stages of what him and Venom came back to do. And I gotta admit, as he's laying here, there's a moment where we see what looks to be butterflies, and it just reminds me about what Doom said about going back in time and changing things, and how some moments are dead butterflies, which won't change the future, but the live ones will. Because after these hours pass and Loki tells him that he's done, it kinda has me thinking like, did Old Man Dylan just give Loki something that's going to alter the future? But either way, when Loki's done, he tells him, 2 for you and 1 for me. Because Loki got himself made a big nice shiny knife, while on the other hand the old man just gets 2 little bullets. And it catches him off guard because he thought he would get more than 2. So the old man takes him, saying that he'll make do. And now that their deal is done, Loki does future Dylan the favor of sending him back to Earth, which now brings us back to a moment not too long after what we saw in Venom issues 36 and 37, where future Dylan extracted the metal from Molten Man, where now Meridius, who's continuing to watch Eddie, he now sees Eddie with Anne Wang, much like we saw in issue 36, and he already knows this is the happiest that Eddie will ever be. He knows where this is going in the next couple years, with Anne becoming She-Venom, getting pregnant with Dylan, and not telling Eddie, as well as her eventually taking Dylan to Carl, which for Dylan is the start of history just repeating itself, where much like his father, Dylan has a hard life ahead of him. But these are only brief thoughts before Meridius sets his focus on Old Man Dylan, because much like in issue 37 where we saw Meridius follow Old Man Dylan to the Sanctum Sanctorum, that plays out the same way here, except when Meridius makes his way to the Sanctum Sanctorum, this time he ends up running into the future Dylan who's just returned. So when Meridius confronts him, he tells future Dylan that he's not supposed to be here. But of course, the old man, he doesn't even know who Dylan is, but he remembers Meridius from the battle. But with saying this, it has Meridius thinking that future Dylan's playing games, because he doesn't know why future Dylan doesn't remember who he is, but it immediately has Meridius thinking two things, where one, this Dylan definitely is from the future, and two, he's coming from a future where Meridius is not. So that in itself has Meridius curious to know what future Dylan knows about the future. And so of course, the old man, he's just trying to fight off Meridius so he can time jump again. But Meridius, he only sees this as a child being disrespectful to his father, which on one hand is a funny thing, but at the same time it goes to show how this Meridius, who was sent back to the beginning of time, who's observed things after all that's happened, he's starting to show more of the Eddie-like qualities, even though he's claimed in the past to have put it all behind him. But after catching up to future Dylan, or Old Man Venom, Meridius takes a look into his mind so he can see what this future holds. And when he does this, this takes us into what Meridius explained to Carnage, like we talked about when we covered Venom War Carnage issue 3, because it's here we're told, in the mind of the old man, Meridius sees the future. He sees the coming war, and the decades of horror that follow. But then the pain comes, which is also when Meridius realizes that Dylan's dying. And it goes on to say he knows radiation from a time yet to come flows from Venom to Meridius. It moves around his being like poison and blood, unfamiliar and all-consuming. The agony lingers as the old man escapes. And so because Meridius is in so much pain, Old Man Venom ends up getting away and jumping forward into the future. But what has happened here with Meridius experiencing this pain and this poison, this was Meridius's first encounter with what would become the K chemical. So for Meridius going forward in the linear timeline from this moment in the past, this is why he went on to start the K program. And as far as future Dylan, once he leaves here, he then arrives at the end of Venom War issue 4 in Grand Garden Arena in the present, where both Eddie and present day Dylan are bonded to the Venom symbiote, just as Dylan, aka Codex, stabs Eddie in the back. And at the time when we saw this, we knew the old man was going to show up. But now, much like with Meridius, and even Carnage from the Venom War Carnage tie-ins, we now know so much more about the events that led up to this point. Alright, so coming back for Venom War Deadpool, this brings us back into the zombiote chaos for a little while, because where we left off, the zombiotes were taking over humans and monsters alike. And to make it worse, the recently returned James Hudson Jr., he just went off the rails and started attacking both, nearly killing Princess in the process, who's like Deadpool's pet symbiote that's also a clone of Carnage. So to save Princess, they bonded and became Princess Deadpool. So now with James Hudson Jr. going off the rails, Deadpool tells Andy to handle the zombiotes while he goes after James. And it makes for a funny moment when he does this, cause he asks him, "Didn't you ever watch John Wick in your universe? Because old Princess Deadpool's about to rage Keanu style all over you." And it just has me thinking like that was perfect, because had Deadpool not said it, that would have been a missed opportunity. So for a moment here, this leads to the two of them going at it, and there's definitely moments where this goes over the top, especially when Princess Deadpool bites James Hudson's head, or just Poison is what he goes by now with his symbiote poison combination. But when Princess Deadpool bites him and has his head in their mouth, Poison starts using his tongue to attack Deadpool, and with how it's done, Wade's head is essentially Princess Deadpool's uvula. So he's trying to dodge while he's dangling around in there. It's hilarious. But after all of this intense tongue action that Deadpool admits he'd rather get from someone else, and it's oddly specific that he has 8 enemies in mind who he'd rather have do this to him, and I'll leave it to you guys to let me know who some of those enemies are in the comments. But it's not too long into this matchup where we find out that this is just taking too long. Because before, when Deadpool told Andy to handle the zombiotes while he handles Poison, on Deadpool's end, or Princess Deadpool's end, they're holding up. But in the case of Andy and the others, the number of people and monsters who are being turned into zombiotes, it's outweighing the number she can take care of with her anti-venom. So she tells Deadpool like, hey, we need you to get this under control before the rest of us are just completely overwhelmed. So what Deadpool ends up doing is he grabs Poison and he tells him that he can more or less take out his anger and his rage on him, which is something Deadpool and his symbiote can take due to his insane healing factor. And as it turns out, this allows Poison to get a moment of clarity and realize what he's doing. So essentially what happened here is Deadpool became Poison's punching bag or stress ball so that James could let out all that berserker rage on him instead of targeting the other monsters in addition to the zombiotes, which in the here and now is definitely a temporary solution. Because with everything Jimmy's dealing with, after being pulled from Earth 1610 to Earth 616, being bonded with the symbiote and then the poison, this latest transformation has filled his mind with so many different memories that he's a complete mess, even on what's considered to be a normal day. So on a day like this that's far from normal, if you take someone like Jimmy with all of his issues and you stack berserker rage on top of it, you practically have a killing machine that doesn't know whose side he's on. And in Deadpool's case, he couldn't stop that. So instead, he just gave him an outlet, which now brings Poison back in line to fight alongside the monsters against the zombiotes, rather than just being out of control and killing both. But now that everybody's on the same page, a conversation stirs up here. And I don't know if I call it a conversation or more so an argument, because when they're fighting, Poison tells Deadpool, "This changes nothing. I know why you sought me out, Deadpool. When this is over, I want you to finish what you started." Which of course has Deadpool like, man, why you gotta kill the mood? While asking him if everyone from his universe is ultimate emo. I see what you did there. But this quickly stirs up the conversation of what they're going to do with Jimmy once all this is over. Because for a moment, Andy's like, well, maybe he can go back to the monsters. Only for Morbius to be like, nah, we're good. We don't want him back. And with Morbius saying that, now it's like, okay, well, if James can't go back to the monster metropolis, then that just kind of leaves us with the other option of Deadpool quote unquote finishing what he started, which like we saw in Venom War Deadpool issue 1, this has been set up to sound like it's referring to Jimmy's death wish, but there's a lot more to it and we'll find out what exactly that is in a moment. But in the here and now, it's just set up to sound a lot more grim than what it actually is. But now that the fight has settled down for a moment, Frank, Morbius, and some of the other monsters, they focus on getting the innocent people off of the street, and during this time we also find that Deadpool and Princess are no longer bonded, since his OP healing factors allowed Princess to recover. But back over with Jimmy, it's here where he lets them know that he doesn't feel like they're completely out of the woods, because he can still feel the rage churning inside of him, and he's not sure how much longer he can hold it back. So Deadpool's just like, maybe we should just get this done. Which of course has Andy thinking about the darker solution that was implied earlier, but then it's here where seemingly out of nowhere, Agent Mobius pops up. And so Deadpool's like, Agent Mobius, there you are, it's about time. Because as it turns out, Deadpool has been expecting him. But when he says this, Morbius is like, hey, did you call me? And Deadpool's just like, no, sorry, Mobius, not Morbius. And it just makes for another funny moment that I never thought I'd see. But of course, with Agent Mobius showing up from the TVA, the Time Variance Authority, he's come here to take James Hudson Jr. So at first, Andy, she's not sure what's going on. So she's ready to fight these guys to keep them from taking him. But Jimmy just tells her that it's alright and let them work. So Mobius, he pays Deadpool his finder's fee just before they take Jimmy and leave. And I mean, before they go, there is a moment here where Deadpool asks Mobius if he can leave some of his guys here to help out, only for Mobius to tell him, sorry, not my division. But also, as they go, there's like this really sad, quiet look as they take Jimmy away. And I mean, really, I'm hoping this is used as an opportunity to get rid of the symbiote, get rid of Poison, and bring back James how he was before Venomized. But I can't help but to think that he's still in a place where Marvel just doesn't know what to do with him. So when he goes away here and there's this really sad look, and it's kind of like, man, I'm thinking either this means we're not going to see Jimmy for a long time, or with it being the TVA, it could be sooner than we think. And it's hard to say which one it's going to be, but either way, I'm not holding my breath in hopes of seeing anything anytime soon. But as expected, Andy is quite pissed when she realizes what this whole thing with Jimmy was all about. But as soon as she confronts Wade about it, he's saved by the zombiotes when more of them show up and they gotta get back to fighting again. But Deadpool doesn't shy away from explaining himself here, cause Andy's not quite done with the topic at hand. But Deadpool admits he knows what he did was messed up, but the TVA, they were gonna come looking for James either way. But at least this way, with how everything played out, Deadpool did manage to get the monsters to come up to the surface and protect the humans. So he lets Andy know he's got a feeling that's gonna work out in their favor. But the way she sees it, the monsters were doing the right thing and Deadpool was just thinking about himself. And he's just like, well, yeah, that and the almighty dollar, because I mean, he did get paid after all. But this time around, with them fighting more of the zombiotes, it's not like before where it seemed like a never-ending wave. Because at this point in Venom War Deadpool issue 3, it crosses over into the territory where the zombiote situation's been handled. As a result of what we saw in Venom War Venomous, when Liz Allen stopped the zombiotes from the source, when she fed her anti-venom into the Alchemax fire suppression system and took a ton of them out. While in addition to that, we also got what Eddie did in Venom War issue 4, when we saw him take Flash's anti-venom symbiote and send out a psychic healing wave to get rid of the zombiotes who were sent to Grand Garden Arena. So for the most part, the zombiotes we see here, they're just some of the stragglers that weren't taken out in either. So it's for those reasons we see the zombiote insanity, the zombiote invasion as it's called, come to an end in the Deadpool tie-ins. And as a result of the monsters coming up to the surface and helping the humans out, Andy Benton is chosen as an ambassador for the surface world. So now we have a monster-human liaison. So she lets Frank and the other monsters know that the humans want to find a way to coexist. But for Frank, he's more the type where he's like, hey, because of his experience, he'll believe that when he sees it. And I mean, those are heavy words coming from Frankenstein's monster, because he's been around long enough to know how much humanity hates monsters. But aside from this, Deadpool, he more or less understands that he's on Andy's crap list, as well as the monsters from Monster Metropolis, but he's more or less like, okay, whatever, who needs them? Princess is healed up, and the deposit just hit, so he's good. Alright, so coming back, this picks up in Grand Garden Arena, just after what we saw with Meridius getting the Necro Spear from Carnage to stop Eddie from killing all the zombiotes. But when this led to Carnage corrupting Eddie, it left Dylan with no other choice than to stop him. And when this happened, we knew there was going to be more to it than what it appeared to be on the surface, because Dylan is Codex, and his blade has the ability to separate symbiotes from the hive. And we find out what this means right away, when the Venom symbiote says, "The King in Black is dead, stabbed in the back by his own son, to save everything. The man, Eddie Brock, could still live. The blow missed his heart physically, at least, but some wounds can never be healed. The Codex blade severs symbiotes from the King in Black's hive. Eddie was a human symbiote, but cut off from his own hive, removed forever from his power. He is only human. The King in Black is dead." And as if this wasn't bad enough, it's also here where we get the arrival of Meridius, who descends upon them like a fallen angel, holding all blood. And when he gets there, he makes it very clear that he's come for the Venom symbiote, because he needs what the symbiote has learned to produce the next generation of zombiotes and remake this world in his image. And to get that started, all he needs to do is stab Dylan with all blood, the Necro Spear, since Dylan is wearing the Venom symbiote right now. But right here, when Meridius tosses the Necro Spear at Dylan, we're told by the Venom symbiote in this moment it's like time slowed down. And right now, with it being the question of who's gonna save them, well, in the case of Toxin, they see him scream, but he can't save them. Flash isn't much of any help at the moment, since he's been corrupted by the Carnage-infused zombiote. Then we got Bedlam, who's still a puddle at the moment, and there's really no telling in his case if the pain is making him stronger. And then you also have Eddie, who wants to stand up and take the hit for Dylan, but at this point he can't because he's lost too much blood. But then it's here where future Dylan steps in, letting off one of his 2 magic bullets, hitting Codex in the back. And when this happens, we're told by the Venom symbiote, Dylan screams, and in his mind I see flashes of the old man Dylan's memory. Every deal he did with every devil, past, present, and future, including us. He promised he'd make us a weapon. Gold erupts from our skin, coating us, changing us. It all takes less than a second. He's made us a weapon, alright. He only needs 1 golden bullet, and we're it. And I'm gonna tell you guys right now, this all gold Venom with the chains, it's looking pretty sick. Like, I wouldn't mind if Venom stayed like this for a good while. And so after taking on this new form, when the Necro Spear reaches Dylan, it just bounces off their chest. And as soon as it does, the next thing we see is them go after Meridius. And as they do, it's here we're told more about Eganrak, which is what future Dylan was calling the magic bullet. With Eganrak being Carnage spelled backwards, we're also told that it's effectively the anti-Carnage. And at this point, with Meridius just being completely caught off guard, because he's just like, what is this? What are you doing? And Dylan just tells him it's called a chokeslam, just before he dunks Meridius' head into the ground, only to then just lay into him. But when he does, it's here where Meridius reveals his face, and he tells Dylan, wait, stop. Dylan, look at me. I'm your father, even now. And it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, he is, technically, but the truth is your Eddie is back there bleeding out. And it just makes for a moment where both the Venom symbiote and Dylan hesitate. And I mean, on one hand, I get it, but at the same time, I'm like, come on, man, you guys know who Meridius is. And so, as expected, Meridius takes advantage of this opportunity. And he even goes on to say, I can't believe you fell for that. Here's a father's mercy. I'm just going to kill you, son. End it cleanly. It's the rest of humanity that'll suffer. Venom World. That's what happens if you keep the symbiote, boy. Because you're a child. You think small. Venomverse, on the other hand. Every world a garden, every soil a cog in my great machines, which right there just gives us another glimpse into the new endgame that Meridius 2.0 had in mind. And as soon as he knocks Dylan back, Eddie comes and grabs Meridius from behind. But keep in mind, Eddie, he's just human now. He's no longer the King in Black, he doesn't have a symbiote, and he doesn't even have the abilities of a human symbiote. So there's really no comparison in power here, and Meridius knows that. So he just forms his hands into a blade, and he runs it right through Eddie, while letting him know that Meridius, he's gonna get around to getting his revenge. But first, he wants Eddie to see the destruction of everything he loves. So right here, Meridius, he tosses Eddie over to the zombiotes, and he tells them to drag Eddie out, to show him their new world. But with Meridius doing all this talking, it's actually played out as the perfect distraction to allow Dylan to grab the Necro Spear and cover it with his anti-carnage just before driving it through Meridius's back, which is kind of turning into Dylan's signature move, you know, just stabbing Eddie's in the back. But this ends up doing it because it effectively kills Meridius, and it destroys the remaining zombiotes who are connected to him, causing all the zombiotes to melt into inert symbiote matter. And when this happens, for a brief moment we're shown Lee Price, the first zombiote, but he's always been different from the other zombiotes since they were made from a sample of Meridius himself, with Lee Price being more of a template for what they would become. So for the time being, we're kind of left to wonder what's going to happen to him later on. But now that the Venom War is over, Dylan tells the others the zombiotes are finished, but they dragged Dad out there and he's bleeding out. We need to find him and heal him. And right there, Flash is like, I'm way ahead of you. Because now that he's got his anti-venom back, when they find Eddie, he can handle the healing part. And right after that, Dylan looks to future Dylan and he tells him, I guess I should thank you. But the old man tells him, thank me? For what? Don't you get it, kid? The big bad who made my future happen. The big domino that started the whole topple. I told you what you wanted to hear, kid. What you expected to hear. That Eddie Brock started it. It all started when I beat Meridius tonight. When I took Venom back. But now that won't happen. I fixed it. I can rest. I'm sorry, kid. But that bullet had your name on it. As the old man without a name disappears. And it's right here where the Venom symbiote starts to realize the terrifying truth, because when matter and antimatter meet, they annihilate themselves and anything around them. When Carnage meets the anti-Carnage, they do the same. They destroy themselves and any symbiote connected to them. Alchemy in reverse. The gold turns black, not the sleek, slippery onyx of a healthy symbiote, but the black of a gangrenous wound. And it's right here where the Venom symbiote remembers that Dylan is part symbiote too. So it quickly forces Dylan out before the contagion's able to get to him. And it goes on to say, but Flash is here, Sleeper, and Toxin. Eddie's out there somewhere. They can help me. I know they can. If there's enough time. But there's never enough time. And it's really messed up because when the soldiers come in armed with K-chemical weapons, Dylan's yelling at Venom like, let me back in, we can fight them. But Venom already knows that's not an option. So it just looks to Dylan, says I love you, son, before leaping to the window to get away. Only to then have these soldiers go full auto, hitting the Venom symbiote just before it went through the window, which is the last that we see of the Venom symbiote for now. And the next thing we do is follow up with Eddie, who's made his way to Our Lady of Saints Church, which is the church where he initially bonded with the Venom symbiote. But this time around, he's met here by the Carnage symbiote, who's saying, Eddie, 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 of all the places to die in, you dragged yourself back here? Back to the classics, is it? Me too, Eddie. Me too. I'm not in the best of shape. I put too much of myself into that spear. Now it's gone. I can't survive on my own. But it was worth it. I felt it, Eddie. Your other, my parent. I felt it die. Which right there is just like, man, I don't know. I hope he lying. But after this, the Carnage symbiote goes on to say, and now it's your turn. You look how I feel, old friend. There are warm bodies outside to sustain me, briefly. But if I could just get a host, an experienced host, And I mean, it's right there with Eddie. He can tell where this is going. But the Carnage symbiote just goes on to say, Eddie, you're dying. I'm dying. What choice do we have? I'll even let you set the terms. Come on. What do you say? Can the two of us make a deal? And there it is. Like, yep. We are on our way to seeing Eddie Brock become the new Carnage. And you know, it just makes me think of what we saw at the conclusion of Venom War Carnage, when the Carnage symbiote and Cletus Cassidy went their separate ways, where at the time, not only was the Carnage symbiote surprised that Cletus Cassidy could go on and live without him, but it also established this thing where it's like, okay, well, Cletus Cassidy, he's out there, and he's a regular human again, but he's back. And really, it just makes me wonder what the symbiote landscape's gonna look like going forward, because it seems like a lot of things are going back down to the street level, or at least as close to the street level as they've ever been, which for the most part I don't see as a bad thing. But after all this build up for the fight between Eddie, Brock, Venom, and Carnage to end like this, I do gotta say, this is not the ending I had in mind, but I'm willing to give it a shot. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.